Chapter 898. Chen Chongqing knew that even if he used all his techniques, he would still be incapable of blocking this cold wave of silent destruction. He had only one choice, and that was to retreat. The problem was that experts of the divine domain could freely traverse mountains and rivers, their speed reaching a level unimaginable to the average person. Unless one was a person with extraordinary talent like Nank, Su Yurong, or Jin Yulu, or could barely maintain their speed for a while. Who could be faster? Wu Qiongbai flew to the front of the platform, her horsetail whisk about to fall. Chen Chongsheng suddenly vanished from his original position, appearing several dozen zhang away in front of the mountain path, the stainless sword in hand. Wu Qiongbai pressure continued forward, the aura of silent destruction blotting out the heavens and earth. The mountain path suddenly shattered, countless cracks appearing on the stone steps. A sword flash could be clearly seen on the plateau at the peak of the mountain. Chen Chongsheng appeared on the other side of the sword flash and was already 200 yards away from the field. The aura that carried the aura of nirvanic extermination chased after him like a rain cloud. Just when he was about to be struck by that chi, Chen Chongsheng vanished once more, his awe-inspiring sword intent tearing through the air as he appeared in front of a pile of rocks protruding from the edge of the plateau. Wu Qiongbai horsetail whisk never fell, because she could not accurately lock onto his figure. He did not have the speed of Nank and Su Yurong, but he was so fast because he was not using a movement technique, but the sword that he was most skilled in. The moment the South Stream Temple sword array fell into chaos and Wu Qiongbai flew through the air, he unsheathed the stainless sword. Then, he performed 3 consecutive sword techniques without hesitation. During this process, he didn't pause at all, and he didn't even think about it. These 3 sword techniques were the true sword of the orthodoxy, the final move of the Mountly sword style, and the hanging sunset of the 3 forms of Wenshui. These were the 3 most decisive sword techniques he could grasp. Of course, he had also added the Yesher step. Everyone who saw this sight was stunned. Many people knew of Chen Chongqing's talent in the sword, and some even believed that although he was young, he could already be called a grandmaster of the sword. But not many people had personally witnessed him use the sword. Only today did they realize that the Pope's cultivation in the sword was truly unfathomable. Even when pursued by an expert of the divine domain at full strength, he could still use his own sword energy to move the crowd and respond so casually and naturally. In the blink of an eye, Chen Chongsheng was several li away. In front of the cliff, he had successfully avoided Wu Qiongbai most berserk killing blow. But his sword energy had been exhausted, and even more troublesome was that Wu Qiongbai had forced him into a corner of the terrain. How could he escape? Wu Qiongbai flew in front of him. Her pressure was slightly weaker than it had been at the start, but her killing intent was even stronger. Heaven and earth responded. Dark clouds shrouded the top of the cliff, and the light was dim. A fierce shout filled with resentment tore through the gloomy clouds and resounded throughout the world. Die! She waved her horsetail whisk towards Chen Chongsheng. Countless tiny bolts of lightning lit up in the strands of the horsetail whisk, emitting terrifying crackling sounds. The lightning illuminated her pale face, which was filled with resentment. She looked like a ferocious ghost, frightening anyone who saw her. Just as the horsetail whisk was about to land on Chen Chongsheng's body, a sword light once again cut through the gloomy sky. This sword light wasn't particularly bright. In fact, it was a little dim, but it gave off a very reliable feeling. The stainless sword was already connected to the vault sheath, transforming into a long sword. This was the stainless sword's strongest form. It was also the form Chen Chongsheng would choose in a desperate situation. This sword light did not originate from the swing of the sword, but from the sword itself. Chen Chongsheng's left hand gripped the hilt, his left hand gripped the tip of the blade, and he held the sword horizontally in front of him. His 2 hands were extremely steady, not trembling in the slightest. This horizontal stroke was the chain, the river dike. This was the 3rd sword that Su Li had passed on to him, the stupid sword whose name had already shaken the world. The horsetail whisk landed on the sword. In a flash, a few extremely fine traces of corrosion appeared on the sword that seemed to have been washed 10,000 times. The stainless sword was forged from the most precious, true dragon whisker of the golden dragon. It was absolutely smooth, without the slightest trace of filth or blood. It was absolutely hard, impossible for anything to crack it. It could be called the perfect material for a sword, able to enter the tier of legendary weapons the moment it was born. But now it seemed like it could no longer endure it. Why? Those traces of corrosion came from the lightning and the berserk chi of silent destruction carried by the horsetail whisk. Those lightning and chi had not truly destroyed the material of the stainless sword, but they had destroyed the sword intent Changsheng had attached to it. The berserk chi of silent destruction that came from the boundless depths of the sea had easily destroyed the serene sword intent that had come from Xining Village's old temple. This did not mean that the former was superior to the latter, but that Wu Qiangbai's cultivation level was much higher than Qin Changxing's. The threshold was very high, and it was forged from iron, making it impossible to casually cross. Anyone who bravely attempted to cross it would often end up with their heads broken and bleeding. There was a loud bang. Violent gales whistled through the cliff, causing a few parasol trees to be minced into pieces, and over 10 cultivators that weren't able to dodge in time were directly blasted off the cliff. Shrill cries resounded abruptly before stopping abruptly. Presumably, their meridians had been severed in midair and they'd lost all vitality. With his sword intent destroyed and powerless to continue, the stainless sword was jolted back with a vault sheath, striking Chun Changsheng in the chest. With a muffled thud, Chun Changsheng crashed into a pile of rocks, his face pale and his expression somewhat gloomy. If he had not relied on his 3 swords to avoid the peak of Wu Qiangbai's power, he would assuredly have been heavily injured and would have found it difficult to rise again. Of course, the most important reason was that he had bathed in the true blood of the Black Frost Dragon. Otherwise, even if he had undergone a perfect purification, he would not have been able to endure it. A sharp howl suffused with ruthlessness burst from Wu Qiangbai's thin lips. This howl carried the joy of killing an enemy, as well as boundless hatred. She would not give Chun Changsheng any chance to counterattack, nor would she give anyone else a chance to save him. The horsetail whisk exuded countless strands of qi of silent destruction as it descended upon Chun Changsheng. Countless green lotus leaves appeared in the air, cutting off the surroundings. Go Hanshi's expression flickered. Shrouded in the radiance of the stars, he flew through the air. His sword was already in his hand, but it was clearly too late. Hu 32 and the bishop of the Southern Church also flew in that direction. The disciples of South Stream Temple paled in fright and cried out in alarm. They wanted to hurry over, but they were even slower. Who could save Qin Changxing at this time? Strangely, Tang 36 did not move. He stared at the fierce red in the center of the plateau, his hand gripping his most powerful life-saving magical artifact. It was a mystery what he was thinking. Strangely, Bianghong also did not move. He calmly gazed at a certain place outside the cliff, as if still pondering Chun Changxing's previous words. His wife was about to kill the enemy who had killed his son. No matter what his emotions were, he should be looking in that direction. Just what was he thinking? Where is he looking? Or perhaps, who was he waiting for? Chapter 899. In the view of the Prince of Xiang and a few people who thought they knew the inside story, Bianghong was acting as a guard for Wu Qiangbei. After all, Chun Changsheng was not an ordinary person. He was the Pope. In order to kill a Pope, there was a high chance of encountering an extremely unexpected situation. And to kill a Pope, one had to prevent all accidents from occurring. For example, that knife. Even now, no one knew whether or not the blade had come to Holy Maiden Peak. Similarly, no one knew whether or not the blade would descend from the sky without warning in the next moment and then chop down everything in the world it wanted to chop down, just like it had done in the capital by the Luo River. Who could save him now? Chun Changsheng didn't think about this matter. In Wenshui City, he knew that the blade had always been outside the city because it had been his request. Afterwards, when he went from Fengyang City to Holy Maiden Peak, he had been in too much of a hurry and hadn't had a chance to notify her. Ever since he found out about his fate at the age of 10, no matter how dangerous the situation was, such as the night that represented death, he was used to facing it alone. If you entrust your fate to others, then it means that you can't control your own destiny. He did not want to be such a person. He was not such a person. From the beginning to the end, he placed his hopes in his own hands. As he gazed at the lotus sea that concealed boundless danger and sensed the aura that was filled with the aura of nirvanic annihilation, he knew that he could no longer conceal his strength. In front of an expert of the divine domain, any scheme or concealment would be viewed with contempt and would assuredly be punished. His right hand was still holding onto the hilt of his sword, and the countless swords in the scabbard were ready to turn into a sky full of flowing lights at any time. His left hand was already raised, and the countless monsters in the Garden of Zhou were already prepared. At any time, they could transform into a mountain of water and charge over. In the Garden of Zhou, Nank had already made her preparations. On his wrist, the heavenly tone monoliths were already ready. He believed that Zhixiu, who had not appeared this entire time, had already made his preparations. There was also the yellow paper umbrella, the falling star stone, and the orthodoxy's divine staff. No one had ever seen all of Chen Changsheng's methods. Even on that night in the snowy mountains, when he faced the legendary demon lord, he still had many techniques that he had not used. In his original thoughts, these methods should be used on a certain elder. Now, it seemed that he had no choice but to appear in this world ahead of time. Even so, could he block the full power attack of an expert of the divine domain? He wasn't confident because the threshold was too high. The heavens and earth were not confident either. Otherwise, why would there be so many people rushing over? Are those people anxious, desperate, or prematurely grieving? Suddenly, the world changed color. The thick dark clouds were painted with a touch of golden light. The gloomy sky became incomparably bright. The forest and the mountains began to burn. The anxious, desperate, sorrowful look was replaced by shock. Everyone looked up at the sky. A straight line of fire appeared in the sky. The line of fire was very long, and it started from the side covered by the clouds. Anyone who had come to South Stream Temple could guess that this was the summit of Holy Maiden Peak. The line of fire extended to the cliff plateau at an unimaginable speed, looking like the burning trace of a falling meteorite. No one had time to react. They could only see the line of fire fall on the edge of the cliff platform. The fragments of the Wutong tree that had been shattered earlier burst into flames, sending out countless sparks, light, and heat. A pair of extremely beautiful phoenix wings fluttered in the flames. A clear and resounding phoenix cry resounded through the world. An unimaginable number of sparks brimming with the chi of life shot toward the lotus sea, brimming with the aura of stillness. Countless sword images flickered in and out of existence, rising and falling, but there was nothing strange about them. On the contrary, they seemed upright, dignified and divine to the extreme. The two chis collided. It was like a god returning from the sea of stars had rung a massive bell. The fierce sound was transmitted to the Tong River several dozen li away. The surface of the river surged with countless waves. The fishermen in the boats and the townspeople kneeled in fear and prayed. On the plateau, the cultivators that were slightly closer and possessed comparatively weaker cultivations were even knocked out by the force of the collision. After some time, the terrifying torrents of chi gradually calmed. The burning sparks gradually extinguished, but the traces of light did not fade. As they gazed at those still dignified and fierce sword intents in the light, those incredibly exquisite sword slashes, many people recalled a famous sight. It was that battle on the capital's bridge of helplessness several years ago, that snowy battle. Seeing that slender figure in the dust, the crowd was abnormally shocked and vaguely guessed at what had happened. Countless sword intents in the light. Only when the dust settled did they return to one sword. It truly was the legendary sword of great light. It truly was the holy maiden Su Yurong. Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng stood side by side on the cliff, facing Wuqiongbai. Chen Changsheng gripped the stainless sword, while Su Yurong gripped the temple sword. Their faces were somewhat pale, probably from injuries, but their expressions were still calm. The plateau was absolutely silent. Everyone was shocked, speechless, not daring to believe their eyes. They felt that what they were seeing was not real. The Holy Maiden had come out of seclusion early. Did she not know how great of a price she would have to pay? Could this possibly bring irreversible harm to her cultivation? The crowd turned to Chen Changsheng and guessed at the reason she had come out early. Only now did they realize that those rumors were true. They couldn't help but feel extremely complicated. There was some envy, some yearning, but most of all jealousy. Of course, there was also another possibility. Su Yurong had already entered the divine domain, so she had come out of seclusion. The problem was, who could accomplish this in 2 short years? Chen Xuanba could not, Emperor Taizong could not, Wang Jitze could not, and not even Zhou Dufu could. The facts proved that Su Yurong truly had not succeeded. As the light gradually dimmed, the qi she exuded became increasingly clear. Although it was holy and profound, it was still an insurmountable distance from that threshold. If this was the case, how could she possibly block the full force attack of an expert of the divine domain? This was the matter that shocked the crowd the most. The one most shocked was Wu Qiongbai, because she was the one involved. She looked at Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng standing side by side, her face slightly pale and her eyes extremely deep. The temple sword truly was formidable, hiding boundless sword intent and boundless light. Purely in terms of technique, it could be called the world's most formidable sword style. But if this was all, Su Yurong would simply not have been able to block her full force attack. Under the crushing pressure of absolute cultivation levels, even the most exquisite sword style was meaningless. But just when she was prepared to use the Tao of silent extinction in the Lotus Sea to suppress her opponent, another sword intent had entered the battle. It was naturally Chen Changsheng's sword. As Chen Changsheng's sword intent entered, Su Yurong's sword of great light actually became even more mellow and perfect. It was to the extent that when she swung the temple sword, it faintly seemed to exude a divine aura. What made her even more shocked and uneasy was that the sword energy of the sword of great light suddenly exploded, becoming several times stronger. Just what is going on here? Chapter 900. Wu Qiongbai could not think of an answer, could not understand how these 2 juniors working together could block an attack that she had gathered her entire life's cultivation. If even she, the person involved, could not understand, then those people on the plateau, who had not even had the time to see, clearly were naturally even more confused. In reality, even Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong themselves didn't understand how all of this had happened. They glanced at each other. They had their own guesses, but they did not dare to believe them. This is impossible. Wu Qiongbai was furious and unwilling to accept this. She swung her horsetail whisk once more at the ground. The green lotus leaves madly danced, exuding an aura of silent extinction. Massive waves seemed to rise from the sea and wreak havoc on the shore. It was like the laws of the world had enveloped the plateau. If it were a cultivator of slightly weaker cultivation, let alone resisting, just seeing this sight would have their Tao hearts pulverized, and they would not be able to muster the will to fight. Go Hanshi, who 32, and the others knew that a battle of this level could no longer be interrupted, so they stopped on the outskirts. This battle had entered its most crucial moment. Tang 36 could no longer control his emotions. He no longer stared at Yang Hong, but at the other side. The disciples of South Stream Temple, the experts of the imperial court, the guardians of the 2 great clans, the elders of the sects of the South, everyone was looking in that direction. The cultivators on the plateau all had their own standpoints, their own inclinations, but at this moment, all of them strangely felt the same sort of expectation. Such a thing had never happened before. It was far too shocking, and logically speaking, it was absurd. But today, everyone had seen it with their own eyes. Since it had happened once, would it happen again? The winds howled as Wu Qiongbai's horsetail whisk, carrying that seemingly real yet illusory sea of silent extinction, rumbled toward Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong. The temple sword flew through the air, sprinkling down countless holy rays of light upon the lotus sea, making it particularly bright and beautiful. At the same time, or perhaps only for an extremely brief moment, the stainless sword also flew through the air, closely following the temple's sword, burning with countless flames. The two sword glows reflected each other, illuminating the gloomy lotus sea. The two sword intents confirmed each other and became even fiercer than before. They were extremely awe-inspiring, and they slashed open a large gap in the aura of death that enveloped the plateau. Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong's two sword arts seemed to have combined into a single sword art. No, to be more accurate, their swords seemed to have become one sword. His sword momentum suddenly increased by countless times. Even if the Lotus Sea was the real Dharma and logos of heaven and earth, it seemed to be able to cut it open. Smoke and dust rose and then gradually fell. Chen Changsheng stood in front of Su Yurong. A trickle of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. His clothes had several holes. He had sustained heavy injuries. Su Yurong's hair was also a little messy. A few strands of hair fluttered in the wind, covering half of her beautiful eyes. Wu Qiongbai was also in a rather sorry state. The front lapel of her Taoist robe had been torn off, and her Taoist bun had come undone. Her hair draped over her shoulders and drifted about in the wind. None of this was important. More importantly, Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong didn't take a single step back. Wu Qiongbai had not taken a single step forward. The two sides were tied. Anyone could see this, and it was also impossible for anyone to believe, even if this was their second time seeing it. Two cultivators who had not yet stepped into the divine domain had actually managed to fight to a draw with an expert of the divine domain in a head-on battle. They had not relied on any divine artifact or technique, only on their own cultivation in the path of the sword and their level of cultivation. This was something that had never happened in history, ever since the heavenly tome monoliths had landed on the central continent. It had never happened. The plateau was still quiet, not a single sound because everyone was too shocked, whether it was Go Hanshi or the vice principal of Scholarly Manor, whether it was the old lady of the Mutuo clan or the head of the Wu clan, whether it was the White Tiger Divine General or the Prince of Xiang, they were all shocked speechless. No one noticed that in a corner of the plateau, a blue-clothed cultivator wearing a bamboo hat and a blue-clothed cultivator from a small sect of the south was moving closer to the battlefield. No one noticed that in the imperial court's diplomatic mission, an extremely unremarkable soldier was moving closer to the White Tiger Divine General. Wu Qiongbai landed on the plateau and gazed at the horsetail whisk in her hand, a rather perplexed expression on her face. She had immersed herself in the divine domain for many years, and her cultivation history was even longer. Who knew how many bizarre things she had seen? But none of these events had dealt a greater mental blow to her than the events of the last 2 days. How could someone dare to kill my most beloved son? How could these two juniors be able to fight to a draw with me? She recalled all the sword styles she had seen in her life in her sea of consciousness, but she still could not understand what was going on. Previously, Su Yurong had probably used the 8 forms of the opening vegetarian style of South Stream Temple, while Chen Changsheng had probably used the blazing sword that Su Li had passed on to him. Not to mention the similarities between these two sword techniques, it could even be said that in terms of sword intents and techniques, they were diametrically opposed, completely incompatible. So why was it that when these two sword techniques were combined, they could coordinate so well? This was absolutely not an ordinary joint sword strike. The degree of perfection of this kind of cooperation could even be said to have far exceeded the degree of intentional cooperation. It was more like some kind of natural movement that secretly catered to the laws and principles of the world. Their defense could be said to be flawless, and their offense was indescribably mysterious. The sword momentum rose abruptly, and its might increased by more than a few times. Just like Wu Qiongbai, many insightful true experts on the plateau were pondering this question. Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong were also thinking. The first time, when Su Yurong broke out of seclusion, the fire phoenix swiftly dancing She had originally wanted to rely on the sword intent she had accumulated in her 2 years of seclusion to force her way through. She had not expected that Chun Chongqing's following attack would have such a massive effect. When his sword and her sword met in the world, they seemed to form some sort of connection. It was a very mysterious connection, very difficult to describe with words. It could only be sensed. The sword styles they used were different, but because of this connection, they naturally cooperated. Even their sword intents seemed to fuse into one. The second time, this feeling was even more obvious and clear. They could accurately sense what the other was thinking. The two swords also seemed to be able to determine the trajectory and angle of the other. Their sword techniques were still different, but their sword intents were interlinked. It was like two beautiful stones hidden beneath a mossy crust had, through the grinding of each other, revealed their true appearance, and then fused into one peerless piece of jade. But just what was going on here? How had all of this happened? Su Yorong smiled at him and asked, "When did you learn the Unity sword art?" Chun Chongqing replied, "Yesterday, I went to the summit to see you. I had nothing better to do, so I read a few books." At Xixing's request, this chapter ends here. It is said that this will make it seem more accented. Chapter 901. Some of the people from his sects hurriedly descended the mountain to search for the disciples who had been thrown off the cliff. The majority of the people remained where they were, still immersed in the shock of those scenes. When they suddenly heard Su Yorong and Chun Chongqing's conversation, they were even more shocked. The Prince of Xiang's expression chilled as he thought, Chun Chongqing truly is a genius of the sword. He only needed 2 days to learn the Unity sword art of South Stream Temple. The White Tiger Divine General's eyes grew even more awe-inspiring, a hint of killing intent flitting through them. It was clear that the level of the sword Chun Chongqing had displayed had only made his killing intent even more intense. The disciples of South Stream Temple were even more shocked and ashamed. They had cultivated the Unity sword art since they were children, but it was far inferior to what the Pope had comprehended in 2 days. Huai Run and Huai Shu even felt a little apprehensive, while Huai Bai shrieked in disbelief. "This can't be the Unity sword art." The Unity sword art was a secret technique of South Stream Temple, and also the foundation of the South Stream Temple sword array. It had extremely high demands on the user, and she simply did not believe that Chun Chongqing could learn the secret technique of South Stream Temple in 2 short days. Moreover, even the Unity sword art could not possess such power that it could directly contend against an expert of the divine domain. A fierce gust of wind suddenly swept over the plateau, obscuring the surroundings with gravel and broken leaves. Cries of alarm rose up once more. No one noticed that Wu Qiongbai had noiselessly flown over the pile of rocks and was once more attacking Chun Chongqing and Su Yorong. She had completely disregarded her status and launched a sneak attack. 2 sword glows shot up at the same time, like 2 pure rainbows hanging between the mountains, the crisp cries of swords echoing through the air. Chun Chongqing and Su Yorong's swords fused together. This time, they seemed even more casual and natural, the sword intent contained within them even more profound and unfathomable. Wu Qiongbai gave an angry and unwilling grunt. Incapable of breaking through the 2 sword glows, she was forced back to the ground. With a light clap, a hole about half a foot deep appeared on the plateau. The stone hole was surrounded by straight and sharp sword slashes. The clouds on the plateau had also been torn apart by the soaring sword intent. Strands of them floated motionlessly in the air, also like sword slashes. These sword slashes were the afterimages of sword intent. For them to appear in the world, one could imagine just how awe-inspiring this sword intent was. It was still a draw. Wu Qiongbai thought of her son who had died a miserable death, and her face paled. She was filled with unwillingness and anger. Staring at the blue sky, she harshly shouted, "Do you not have eyes?" Chun Chongqing and Su Yorong stood side by side, looked at each other, and smiled. The 2 of them recalled the feeling when the 2 swords merged together and felt very carefree. Their minds were wide open, and life was wonderful. Nothing could be better than this. They truly had used the Unity sword art, but it was not that simple. Just as Huai refused to believe, the Unity Sword Art of South Stream Temple could indeed multiply the power of sword techniques, but could not achieve the world-shaking level they had achieved today. Yesterday, when Chun Chong Sheng saw the Unity Sword Art used by the two girls of South Stream Temple at the mountain gate, he felt that there was something wrong. At the peak of Holy Maiden Peak, he had already vaguely guessed the origin of this matter. Today, his guess was finally proven. He sighed and said, "I didn't think that it could be used in reverse." Su Yurong said, "I was just bored and wanted to give it a try. I didn't expect that I would be able to cooperate with you." Chun Chong Sheng said, "Maybe it's because I memorized it backwards." Su Yurong said, "I forgot." Chun Chong Sheng said, "It was very risky." Su Yurong had greatly modified the Unity Sword Art. It was very risky, and could even be described as a gamble. This modified Unity Sword Art required the swordsmen to have absolute trust in each other. If their minds were completely linked, the power would be enormous. On the other hand, if there was even the slightest doubt in each other, not only would this sword art fail, it would even bring great danger to the swordsmen. Absolute trust and telepathy had always been a very difficult task. Even among the South Stream Temple disciples who had cultivated the Unity Sword Art for many years and were able to form a sword array, only an extremely small number of them were able to do it. Logically speaking, someone of Holy Maiden Su Yorong's status should not have made such a risky transformation. However, Chun Chongqing now knew that the woman he loved was not the pure and holy fairy that was untainted by the mortal world, but a girl who liked to gamble, so he was not surprised. Of course, this was only the foundation of cultivating the Unity Sword Art. For example, the two South Stream Temple girls at the Mountain Gate last night could increase the power of the Unity Sword Art, but they could not do what Su Yorong and Qin Changsheng had done. This was because the Unity Sword Art had far too high of a demand on the swordsmen. Su Yorong's modification of the Unity Sword Art originated from her experience with Chun Changsheng in the Garden of Zhou many years ago, when she and Chun Changsheng cultivated the Having Blade style together. At the time, she had memorized the first move of the Having Blade style, while Chun Changsheng had memorized it from the last move until they finally met. She placed all the comprehensions from this experience into the modified Unity Sword Art. Another year, she and Chun Changsheng met in the Mausoleum of Books, quietly discussing and comprehending in front of the monolith hut. She also placed all that she had learned into the modified Unity Sword Art. This was the condensation of the most essential knowledge of a cultivating genius, and it was also a memory of the past, a longing for a certain person. Chun Changsheng's mind was linked with hers, and they had absolute trust in each other. He was a participant in those experiences. He had learned the Having Blade style and shared his understanding of the monolith inscriptions. Those comprehensions and Dao were their shared memories and past. He could accurately know what she wanted to do and could act accordingly. In order to learn this sword style, one first had to learn the Unity Sword Art, and then they had to cultivate and comprehend together in front of the heavenly tome monoliths. Finally, one had to learn the Having Blade style. The foundation of all this was absolute trust in each other. In the entire world in the last 1,000 years, only Chun Changsheng and Su Yorong could fulfill these conditions. Thus, in this world, only he and she could use this sword style. It was just like how the plateau was filled with people, but they only had eyes for each other. Those people were all looking at them. A cool breeze blew. Chun Changsheng and Su Yorong stood side by side, their expressions calm, their eyes clear and bright, their sleeves drifting in the wind. They truly were a pair made for each other. They truly were an immortal couple. A voice resounded over the plateau. The Taoist canon once recorded the art of harmonizing the two swords, each one filled with mystical words. However, in the last 1,000 years, no one has ever personally seen it. Seeing it today, it truly is incomparably profound. Byung Hong continued, "I have to admit that the two of you are truly a match made in heaven." Hearing this, a lot of people felt that it was very reasonable. These words couldn't be more suitable for Chun Changsheng and Su Yorong. One was the Pope, the other the Holy Maiden of the South. The two of them had once been engaged, and after countless incidents, they still found each other agreeable. They were both geniuses of cultivation, both of them reaching star condensation in their youth. Now, with their harmonized swords, they could even contend against an expert of the divine domain. In every aspect, Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong were worthy of being described as a match made in heaven. Go Hanshi by Kai and the other disciples of the Mountly Sword sect were still stunned by Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong's sword style, but upon hearing these words, they couldn't help but sigh with emotion. If eldest brother were to see today's scene and hear these words, he wouldn't know what to think. At any other time, to be able to personally witness such a mystical sword style, besides sighing in praise, I would drink 3 cups of wine to liven things up. Alas, it's not possible today. Byung-hung paused, then continued. Although my son is neither virtuous nor filial, I am his father, so I have to do a few things for him. Chapter 902. Through the fated star plate, Su Yorong had already deduced a few problems. As she listened to Chen Changsheng's explanation, she quickly understood what had happened. She naturally believed Chen Changsheng's words, but just when she was prepared to speak, she saw the exhaustion on Byung-hung's face and the specks of white hair on his temples. She couldn't help but freeze. The pain of losing a son was truly the hardest thing in the world to endure. Byung-hung walked behind Wu Qiongbai and gently patted her on the shoulder. Rest for a while. Wu Qiongbai had not been able to kill Chen Changsheng, had not even been able to defeat him and Su Yorong working together. She was still furious and unwilling, her mood extremely irritable. When she heard these words, she felt both wronged and pained. Sobbing, she shouted, "You're still willing to come out?" These words were true. Given Byung-hung's strength, if he had used his full strength at the very beginning, let alone Su Yorong and the girls of South Stream Temple, even if that metal blade had truly arrived at Holy Maiden Peak, it still would not have been able to stop this couple from killing Chen Changsheng. Now, he finally came out. Of the storms of the 8 directions, Byung-hung's fighting strength had been ranked at the very front. Even the Tianhai Divine Empress admired him. Could Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong still stand a chance against a true expert of the continent? If I give you one more day, no, maybe only a few moves, your harmonious twin swords will be completely proficient, and there will be no more loopholes. Neither I nor anyone else will be able to do anything to you, so I'm sorry, I can't give you this chance. Byung-hung looked at Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong and said, I will strive to separate you in one move and then defeat you. The moment he finished speaking, he had already attacked Chen Changsheng. A small red flower was tied to the pinky finger of his right hand. The entire continent knew that this red flower was Byung-hung's most powerful weapon, the essence of his entire life's cultivation. In the past, beneath the mausoleum of books, the Tianhai Divine Empress's storm fist had killed Guan Xingke with a single punch. Byung-hung had relied on this red flower to barely manage to receive the other punch. When Byung-hung attacked, the red flower very naturally began to sway, arriving about half a foot in front of his finger. The little red flower arrived in front of Chen Changsheng even faster than his hand. Chen Changsheng could already see the sparkling water droplets on the petals. He didn't even have time to think. The stainless sword stabbed forward, noiselessly tearing through the air and leaving behind a bright streak of light on the plateau. This time, he used the intellectual sword, using the irregular orbit to avoid the red flower. His ultimate goal was Byung-hung's forehead. At the same time, Su Yorong's temple sword also pierced through the air. Silent and lightless, it trembled in the wind, seeming somewhat weak. She used the small building sword. It was said that in the past, a certain senior of the South Stream Temple lived in a separate building on the upper reaches of the flower stream. On a certain winter day, he observed the silently blooming winter sweet and was inspired to create this sword style. This sword style triumphed through ingenuity. It was silent yet beautiful. It seemed delicate, but in reality, it was very tough. There was no connection between the intellectual sword and Xiaozhu sword, and there was no connection between their sword essences. However, just like the previous few times, when Chun Changsheng's sword and Su Yurong's sword simultaneously appeared on the plateau. The two sword arts seemed to have undergone some kind of magical transformation. They perfectly merged into one, and no loopholes could be found. Chun Changsheng, Su Yurong, and Wu Qiong clashed several times while Bianghong watched from the side. He could tell that this was a united sword style based on the unity sword art of South Stream Temple, but he did not understand exactly why this united sword style could allow two completely different sword techniques and sword intents to fuse together, causing their power to soar. Only now, when he faced that bright sword glow and the delicate sword silhouette that followed it, did he vaguely grasp the principle behind it. This profound and indescribable feeling was not a sword style or a sword technique. It was more like a technique that was completely different from the path of the sword, an even more direct technique. This technique was incomparably powerful and profound. It was like a torrential rain in the sky, or like a flying goose descending upon the magma covering the ground. It was ruthless to the extreme, brimming with killing intent. Once it was used, it seemed like it could sever all things in the world, all connections. But Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong seemed to be using this technique in reverse. The torrential rain fell into the magma, the damp mist gradually turning into calm, clear water. The mountain pass condensed into a blue lake, the shores of which grew countless green plants, exuberant with life. This technique, that should have severed all connections in the world, in their hands, could reconnect all separated things in the world. Bianghong could not recall a Taoist technique like this in Holy Maiden Peak, the Li Palace, or the 10,000 Years Pavilion. He had not even seen any records of it. In the present world, besides Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong, only Wang Pe or Wang Jitze, who had suddenly returned to the mortal world, could recognize this technique. But to Bianghong, in order to break Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong's sword style, the most important thing was not to comprehend it, but to break it. Even if he could not completely comprehend it for the time being, he could rely on his cultivation level and his abundant true essence to forcefully break their sword style. The seemingly delicate little red flower came to the sky, full of sword shadows. Suddenly, the little red flower seemed to become incredibly heavy, its advance greatly slowed. Even space itself seemed to distort under the weight of the little red flower. Sand and stone madly tumbled, and the winds howled. The sword shadows that filled the sky were affected by this and froze for a moment. The momentum of the swords was still like a majestic mountain, but it was no longer as perfect as it was before. It was like an endless mountain range, like two green mountains facing each other across the river gorge. A gap, or rather, a passageway, had appeared between them. This gap disappeared in the blink of an eye. Any other cultivator would be unable to use it even if they could see it. But Bianghong was an expert of immense cultivation, and the gap in his opponent's sword energy had been created by him in the first place. The somewhat slow red flower suddenly sped up, bringing with it a dark red streak of light as it attacked Chun Changsheng's face. If Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong continued with their previous sword technique, even if their sword energy could once more become unshakable, they would no longer be able to keep the little red flower out. Without hesitation, Chun Changsheng abandoned the intellectual sword, bringing it back to his eyes like a bolt of lightning. He was not using the stupid sword, but borrowing the sword to cleave through the air. An extremely clear and sharp sword chime resounded across the plateau. It was the descent of heavenly music that he had used in his duel with Su Yurong on the capital's bridge of helplessness. The moment Chun Changsheng drew back his sword, Su Yurong's mind was connected to his. Without hesitation, she dispersed the little construct sword and used the temple sword to stab at a certain place in the air. She had no time to return her sword to its sheath, so she used the world as a sheath. This action was returning the sword. Her action of returning the sword seemed to be broken down into countless images and then reassembled. The sword, imbued with true essence, was constantly colliding with the air, grinding against each other and emitting countless sword cries. When these sword cries came together, They became a long and archaic sword cry. This was the first sword she had used on the capital's bridge of helplessness. The Southern Sea Sword Cry. Chapter 903. Back then, in the snowstorm on the bridge of helplessness, her Southern Sea Sword chant and Chun Chongqing's descent of heavenly music were opponents. But today, they were comrades. And these two sword styles had both originated from South Stream Temple, so they were naturally close. The cries of the swords accompanied the cries of the swords, lingering and changing. The cries became more and more impassioned, until they became sharp and thin, and then disappeared. Not being able to hear did not mean that there was no sound. It was just that the frequency at which the two swords vibrated was too high. It had already exceeded the range that ordinary people could hear. People couldn't hear it, but the flowers could. As the soundless sound wave attacked, the little red flower suddenly stopped, as if it was being blown by the wind, and began to sway. The petals trembled at a speed that could not be seen by the naked eye, and the sparkling water droplets were shaken into even finer particles, splashing in all directions. The seemingly weak droplets of water actually contained Yang Hong's vigorous, true qi. Chen Chongsheng and Su Yorong's awe-inspiring sword intents were extremely swift. There might no less than that of an arrow. On the plateau, there were countless shrill sounds of air being torn and the sound of skin being torn. Numerous small holes appeared on the hard cliff rocks and the ground. Seeing this scene, everyone was shocked speechless. Their faces were pale, and they thought to themselves how miserable it would be if they were the ones on the scene. The little red flower floated quietly in the air, still delicate and weak. Because of the departure of the water droplets, it seemed a little weary, but it was far from dispersing. Regardless of whether it was the sword hum or the sword chime, there would always be a moment when it would stop. When that happened, what would Chen Chongsheng and Su Yorong rely on to resist Yang Hong's powerful attacks? Chen Chongsheng knew that he couldn't let the situation continue like this. With a slight movement of his divine sense, a stone flew out from his sleeve and smashed towards the little red flower. This was not a stone pearl formed from the heavenly tome monoliths, but a white heaven stone that was deeply connected to the heavenly tome monoliths. This white heaven stone was incomparably round, its edges inlaid with an extremely complex array of black gold. It was extremely beautiful, and it was one of the orthodoxy's treasures, the falling star stone. With Chen Chongqing's current cultivation, he was far from being able to display the true power of the heavenly tome monoliths, so he chose the falling star stone. As far as he knew, the falling star stone seemed to be able to deal with that little red flower. An ancient power that seemed to come from ancient times appeared on the plateau, along with the falling star stone. Countless cold winds poured into the falling star stone, and the gravel on the ground that had just stopped rolling started rolling again. Even the surrounding dharma and logos of heaven and earth began to distort, just like what the little red flower had done before. An incomparably deep black hole appeared in the sky and was gradually expanding. The falling star stone floated within, releasing a dim light like a star. Sure enough, the little red flower didn't continue forward. Instead, it stopped at the periphery, as if it was resisting the falling star stone. If Chen Chongsheng wanted to leave, he only needed to wait a little longer, and he would be able to use the falling star stone to forcefully break open a space tunnel and go to the plains hundreds of miles away. But he had never thought of leaving, and, at the same time, Yang Hong would not give him a single chance. A fist pierced through the air. The string tied to his pinky was pulled taut, as if it was made of iron. The little red flower moved forward. The string passed through the black hole vortex formed by the falling star stone. With a snapping sound, the thin rope broke into two. This string had been tied to Yang Hong's pinky for many years. Even on the night of the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, it had not been broken. It was assuredly no ordinary object. In the end, it was unable to resist the cutting of space and broke. But the black hole formed by the falling star stone was also cut in two by this strange string and then rapidly faded. Yang Hong's fist had already arrived in front of the little red flower, shattering the remnants of the black hole and arriving in front of Chen Changsheng. Just what sort of fist was this, to contain such terrifying power that it could directly shatter the spatial barrier formed by a treasure of the orthodoxy? With the cry of a phoenix, the silhouette of a green tree appeared in the void. Her white temple robe drifted in the wind. Su Yurong untied her bow, gripped it in her hand, and transformed it into the Tong Palace. But Bianghong's fist was too fast. Before the Tong Palace could take form, it had already been shattered. A trickle of blood flowed from the corner of Su Yurong's lips. She had been injured. Bianghong's expression did not change. He continued forward. As he watched the fist get closer and closer, Chen Changsheng recalled that night in the Mausoleum of Books. On that night, Bianghong had been heavily injured by the Tianhai Divine Empress's fist. Only now did he realize that the heavily injured Bianghong had actually comprehended something. He no longer placed all his thoughts on external objects, but had learned to condense the world into his own body. Bianghong's fist actually had some of the aura of the Tianhai Divine Empress's fist. Compared to that night, he was now a level higher in both cultivation and fighting prowess. In the past, he was already an extremely powerful expert of the divine domain, but now he could even get stronger. How would he deal with this? Bianghong was correct. Although Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong possessed world-shaking talent, this was still their first time using the harmonious sword style, so they could not use it perfectly. At this moment, neither the harmonious sword style, the treasure of the orthodoxy, nor Su Yurong could help Chen Changsheng. He could only rely on his own strength to receive Bianghong's fist. How could he receive it? Chen Changsheng also used his fist. A moment ago, he had brought his sword back and let out a heavenly cry. At this moment, he held his sword horizontally in defense, the stupid sword. Then he clenched his left fist and smashed it at Bianghong's fist. The fist flew through the air, howling through the air. The 5 stone pearls on his wrist incessantly trembled, seeming incomparably heavy. An indescribable boom resounded through the plateau, traveling several dozen li away. The fishermen on the Tong River who had not yet had time to get up began to kowtow with ghastly pale faces, praying for the thunder to stay away. The disturbance on the plateau was naturally even greater. The clash of 2 massive forces caused the ground to sink a foot or so. Just as a semicircular shroud of chi appeared, it was immediately shattered, unleashing countless waves of chi. The winds howled. Even though the nearby cultivators had already fled, they were still caught up in the shock waves and thrown to the ground. In the waves of chi that gushed out, one could see a figure rapidly retreating, then heavily crashed into the center of the plateau, several hundred zhang away. A deep trench appeared on the plateau, as if someone had plowed it. Chen Changsheng stood at the end of this trench, his face pale and his expression perplexed. He seemed to have suffered an extremely heavy injury. As the dust settled, Bianghong drew back his fist. Just as he was about to flee, he suddenly stopped. With a wave of his right hand, he sent an arrow flying out of nowhere. Su Yurong was dressed in white ceremonial robes, her hand gripping the tong bow, her black hair drifting in the wind. Tin Sum Wu arrows quietly hung in the air, ready to fire at any moment. This was the first time many people had seen Su Yurong like this. Very few people knew that this was Su Yurong's strongest move. If Bianghong insisted on pursuing Chen Changsheng, he would assuredly have to bear the torrential barrage of Wu arrows. Even though he was an expert of the divine domain, he still had to consider whether this was worthwhile. Chapter 904. The plateau was instantly plunged into absolute silence. From a moment Bianghong attacked, the disciples of South Stream Temple, Go Hanshi, and Hu 32 had all stopped, no matter how nervous they were. Bianghong had issued a challenge to Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong, implying that he acknowledged that if Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong worked together, they had the right to fight against an expert of the divine domain. Since this was a battle of equals, they deserved respect. The string had already been severed, and only a few inches of Bianghong's pinky remained. The little red flower floated in the air like a rootless duckweed, delicate and pitiful. Logically speaking, now that his best move had been broken, the crowd should have favored Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong. But who among those who had personally witnessed Biang Hong's punch would dare make such a judgment? Crucially, Biang Hong had used his absolute strength and abundant experience as an expert of the divine domain to successfully separate Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong. Chen Changsheng was now heavily injured. If he could not use the unity sword art with Su Yurong, could he still continue? Everyone was nervously watching the scene, wanting to know how the situation would develop next. Then, something unexpected happened. Someone had launched a sneak attack on Chen Changsheng. This person was a true expert of the peak of star condensation. The second-ranked divine general of the Great Zhou, the White Tiger. An extremely cold and harsh bellow resounded through the air. The White Tiger divine general rushed behind Chen Changsheng, gripped his spear with both hands, and thrust it at Chen Changsheng's back. The spear flew through the air, its momentum ferocious and savage. It seemed like it wanted to pierce through Chen Changsheng's body, even nail him to the ground. Chen Changsheng was heavily injured, his expression somewhat perplexed. It was clear that he had not yet awoken from his heaven-shaking clash with Biang Hong. If the White Tiger Divine General's spear, imbued with his entire life's cultivation, could break through his defenses, it would pierce straight through his ethereal palace. At that time, even if the Tianhai Divine Empress came back to life or Wang Jitsa suddenly appeared, they would still be unable to save him. Now, just who could change all this? A blade. It descended from the sky. It gave its answer. This blade ignored the distance between the heavens and earth, descending from the sky to the plateau. With an indomitable momentum, it slashed down at the White Tiger Divine General's head. Seeing that iron saber, everyone on the cliff platform guessed who had come, and exclamations of surprise suddenly arose. Wang Pu of Tianyang. The Prince of Xiang slightly narrowed his eyes, his hands lightly caressing the rather uncomfortable flab tied up by his belt. He did not move, his thoughts inscrutable. A few days ago, they had met on Chicken Crowing Mountain outside Wenshui City, and today he had been waiting for Wang Pu to appear. There were many people like the Prince of Xiang, and they were all waiting for Wang Pu to appear. Wu Qiongbai was one of them. At the very beginning, before she attacked Chen Changsheng, she had angrily shouted at the sky. Wang Pu had finally arrived. Sure enough, they came. Wu Qiongbai had been preparing for Wang Pu's arrival this entire time. She didn't know why the White Tiger Divine General suddenly wanted to kill Chen Changsheng, but she didn't care. As long as Chen Changsheng died, it didn't matter who killed him. She let out a shrill cry and flew into the air. The horsetail whisk in her hand wrapped around the iron saber with the will of quietus. At the same time, her Taoist sleeves fluttered in the air like a nimble dragon as they coiled around the iron blade. At this moment, she pushed her cultivation to the limit. On the iron saber, layers upon layers, there were at least hundreds of layers of defense. She was very clear that she was not Wang Pu's opponent. At most, she could only block his blade. But a few moments was enough. She was confident that the White Tiger Divine General could kill Chen Changsheng. Even if Chen Changsheng still had some hidden treasures, she was confident that her husband could defeat Su Yurong in the shortest time possible and kill Chen Changsheng. The situation on the plateau had changed too quickly, the scenes rapidly changing like streams of light. Other than the people involved, no one could clearly see what was happening, much less take action. No one noticed that a seemingly unremarkable man had silently moved more than 100 feet towards the center of the field. And no one noticed that in a corner of the plateau, among the cultivators of several small sects in the south, a blue-clothed visitor wearing a bamboo hat had raised his head to glance at the sky. At that moment, Chen Changsheng was still retreating, the White Tiger Divine General had just taken his first step, and Su Yurong had drawn the tongbow. The blue-clothed visitor in the bamboo hat was not watching the soul-stirring battle. Instead, he was looking at the sky. At that time, there was nothing in the sky. Of the thousand-some cultivators on the plateau, the blue-clothed visitor was the first to look at the sky. Even the Prince of Xiang was a few moments behind him. He was standing under a tree. In his eyes, the sky should have been cut into many pieces. Which piece was he looking at? It should have been that blade-like sky. He sensed that Wang Pa had finally arrived. Only those extremely close to him could see that the blue-clothed visitor was wearing a copper mask under his bamboo hat. The copper mask seemed very mysterious. At some point, it had lost a small corner, but it still tightly covered his face, revealing only his eyes. The blue-clothed visitor looked at the sky, his eyes abnormally deep and indifferent. He had waited for a very long time. That blade had finally arrived. Now, he was about to move, because he knew that the blade needed only 3 seconds to break through Wu Qiangbai's obstruction and cut off the White Tiger Divine General's head. And in these 3 seconds, the White Tiger Divine General could not kill Chen Changsheng. Since Chen Changsheng was the Pope, he assuredly had methods to preserve his life. As for Bianghong, even if he managed to force Su Yurong back in these 3 seconds, he would probably only be able to restrain Chen Changsheng, not kill him. He was the only one capable of killing Chen Changsheng in these 3 seconds. In his initial plan, the blue-clothed visitor had never thought about personally taking action, as this would increase the risk of him being exposed. But he had not expected the Prince of Xiang to be so patient. From start to finish, other than using the blazing sun style to shout out a clear sound, he had not done anything else. Now that Wang Pa had arrived, the Prince of Xiang was even less likely to take action. The greatest surprise was that Su Yurong had disregarded the fact that her cultivation career might suffer a severe setback and forcefully left seclusion. And the sword style she and Chen Changsheng used together was so wondrous that it could even contend against an expert of the divine domain. Otherwise, Chen Changsheng would have been killed by Wu Qiangbei at the very start. All these factors added together ultimately resulted in the fact that if he did not take action, Chen Changsheng might survive. Fortunately, the situation was still under his control. Wang Pa was obstructed by Wu Qiangbei, Su Yurong by Bianghong, and the White Tiger Divine General's explosive attack was already very difficult for Chen Changsheng to deal with. As for Go Hanshi, the disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect, the disciples of South Stream Temple, and the priests, they were still some distance away and not worthy of his attention. He was confident that if he took action, Chen Changsheng would assuredly die. Now was the best chance. This was a chance that could not be missed. Little me and Song Song's child was born yesterday, 8 caddies. It's truly a sigh of sorrow. Chapter 905. Wu Qiangbai's horsetail whisk and Taoist robe wrapped around the blade, descending from the sky. Bianghong's body was covered in a torrential rain of Wu arrows. The White Tiger Divine General's spear thrust down. Just as the blue-clothed visitor had predicted, the spear failed to pierce through Chen Changsheng's body. An incomparably divine chi spread out as the orthodoxy's divine staff appeared behind him, blocking this fierce and treacherous strike. The White Tiger Divine General roared, his true essence exploding. The spear pierced through the divine radiance and shot at Chen Changsheng. With a clang, Chen Changsheng held his sword horizontally in front of him, forcefully clashing with the White Tiger Divine General. His face paled even more. At this moment, a chi appeared on the plateau. This chi was very difficult to describe with words. It had a strange smell to it. It was very fishy, but it did not stink, only made one feel fear. It seemed to carry the fishy smell of the sea, but also like the smell of the blood of those beasts and fish whose fins had been cut off. This chi was so powerful that it was terrifying. Even the divine chi exuded by the orthodoxy's divine staff was suppressed. This chi came from the blue-clothed visitor. At the final moment, he no longer needed to conceal himself. He wantonly exuded his chi to the world, displaying his unimaginably powerful cultivation level. The cultivators of the small sects standing at his side were shaken by this tyrannical chi until they vomited blood and dropped to the ground. Separated by a very long distance, the blue-clothed visitor sent a palm at Chen Changsheng's back. In the sky above the plateau, a massive blue palm appeared, carrying with it the stench of blood and the sea wind. It howled through the air as it slammed down at Chen Changsheng's head. This giant green palm contained an extremely terrifying power, and it smashed down like a sea. Compared to the blue-clothed visitor's technique, Wu Qiangbai's heaven receiving lotus sea seemed much weaker. Su Yorong's face paled as she sensed this qi and looked at the blue-clothed visitor. Just where did this expert come from? The blue-clothed visitor was much stronger than Wu Qiangbai, so he was naturally a true expert that had immersed himself in the divine domain for many years. The problem was that there were only a few such experts on the continent. Who wouldn't recognize them? This blue-clothed guest's aura clearly did not belong to any of them. Where did this person come from? Tang 36, Go Hanshi, Hu 32, the priests, and the disciples of South Stream Temple were all dumbfounded, unable to even speak. To resist the white tiger divine general with his heavily injured body and then be ambushed by such a terrifying expert of the divine domain. Anyone could see that Chen Changsheng was in desperate straits. Who could save him now? The monster tied in the garden of Zhou or Nank, or with the heavenly tome monoliths on his wrist. No, none of these would do. The strength of that azure-robed guest was too terrifying. Suddenly, the momentum of the saber in the sky intensified, and the clear light that was falling seemed to be coated with a layer of cold light. It was obvious that Wang Pa had sensed the aura and killing intent of the green-clothed visitor and wanted to break out of the lotus sea to save Chen Changsheng. The horsetail whisk broke, and the iron blade fell, but it still did not fall. As the clear light fell on the cliff platform, so did the sharp broadsword will. The strange man in green was not moved at all. His calculations were very clear. 3 breaths were 3 breaths. Wu Qianbai could block that blade for at least 3 breaths. After he killed Chen Changsheng, the energy of the blade, descending from the sky, might injure him a little, but what did that matter? Wu Qianbai and Bi Yanghong had to bear the crime of killing the Pope, so they had to work together with him. With 3 experts of the divine domain working together, no matter how powerful that blade was, what could it do? No matter how cautious the Prince of Xiang was, would he still not be able to clearly see the situation? Given the personality of the Chan imperial clan, he would assuredly personally enter the battlefield and seek the greatest merit. Wang Po's death was assured. Wang Po was dead. The Pope was dead. The Holy Maiden was dead. The Li Palace was broken. Holy Maiden Peak was silent. The orthodoxy was in decline. White Emperor City was already in their hands. Blackmail Shualao City to control the imperial court. Divide the world in 3. Then divide the world equally. Finally, monopolize the world. This beautiful scene had been imagined by him and his clansmen for many years, secretly sketched out for many years. Today, they had finally ushered in a grand opening. The blue-clothed visitor's eyes were still gloomy and cold, but the flame of ambition in their depths had already begun to burn. As long as his palm descended, no matter what other treasures Chen Changsheng had, even the divine artifacts of the orthodoxy, they would all be pulverized into powder. For this, he was already prepared to lose several of his fingers. Yet, in the next moment, a smear of dark red suddenly appeared on that incomparably beautiful scene. All the images, like the golden spears and armor horses, the strolling of the divine path, or the peering into the abyss, were somewhat blurred by this smear of red, impossible to see clearly. The smear of red grew brighter and brighter, about to become fresh blood. The flame in the blue-clothed visitor's eyes was suddenly extinguished, because his palm had not descended. Chen Changsheng had not died. What had blocked his palm was a small red flower. All the red he had seen had come from this flower. An extremely muffled sound fell into the ears of everyone on the plateau. It was a sound like wet cotton being struck, like mud falling, like a red wetness. A small red flower appeared on Chen Changsheng's back. Then it began to bloom, blossom, giving birth to countless petals that rose into the air to resist the massive palm of blue light descending from the sky. Light was thrown into disarray, killing intent surged. The blue-clothed visitor's pupils constricted. Of course, he recognized that little red flower. All the cultivators recognized that little red flower. This little red flower had been tied to be Yang Hong's pinky finger for many years. Only today, when the string and the black hole formed by the falling star stone were destroyed, did the red flower regain its freedom, allowing it to move as it pleased. But where the red flower went and what it did, it naturally had to obey its master. It had suddenly appeared behind Chen Changsheng and blocked the blue-clothed visitor's killing blow. This was naturally beyond Hong's will. Why had Beyond Hong suddenly saved Chen Changsheng? After all, Chen Changsheng was the enemy who had killed his son. Even if Chen Changsheng's final declaration of his willingness to leave with him had made him suspicious, why had he done this? The blue-clothed visitor could not understand why, but he did not continue to think about it, because thinking also required time. As an expert of the divine domain, he only needed a thought to calculate the cause and effect of many things in an extremely short amount of time. But the blue-clothed visitor knew that he could not waste even this little bit of time. 3 breaths of time was truly very short, passing in the blink of an eye. The blue-clothed visitor immediately flew off the cliff, no longer sparing a glance at the battlefield. He no longer cared whether the White Tiger Divine General could kill Chen Changsheng or whether the Prince of Xiang was prepared to act. He flew like a thunderstorm, his sleeves drifting in the wind, shattering the tree as he instantly traveled several hundred zhang. However, the little red flower seemed to have some sort of intelligence. After shattering the palm of azure light that was descending from the sky, it suddenly disappeared from its original position. It suddenly flew to the sky outside of the cliff. Its petals drifted down like rain, covering a radius of several miles and sealing off the blue-clothed visitor's path. Each of the bright red petals contained an extremely terrifying power, and they were as heavy as mountains. Chapter 906. The petals drifted in the wind, dense and numerous like a sea. Beyond Hong's figure appeared in the sea of flowers, his feet stepping on the air as he attacked the blue-clothed visitor. When the demon lord had entered Mount Han and the elder of heavenly secrets had sent a message to the world, Beyond Hong had been in the distant 10,000 years pavilion in the south, but he had been the first to arrive at Mount Han. Even amongst the experts of the divine domain, he was the strongest in terms of speed and long-distance rating ability. As he saw the sky full of red petals sealing off his path, the blue-clothed visitor knew that his chance had passed. If he could not forcefully push back Beyond Hong, he would inevitably be caught by this person and unable to escape. The blue-clothed visitor gave a fierce howl. Circulating the energy of his entire life, he turned and thrust his palms forward. Countless rays of awe-inspiring green light seeped out from the edges of his palms, transforming into extremely sharp flying blades that whistled through the air at Beyond Hong. The green blades whistled through the air like a hurricane, extremely cold and sinister. In an extremely short amount of time, the moisture in the air condensed into droplets of water that rained down. It was like the rain and wind of the sea, its power terrifying beyond compare. To experts of the divine domain, if they were not using true divine artifacts like the Frost God Spear or the Heaven-Shrouding Sword, ordinary weapons were far inferior to the weapons formed from their star radiance and true essence. For instance, these flying blades suffused with an awe-inspiring green light. Even a star condensation cultivator who had undergone a perfect purification would have their bones severed and flesh sent flying, their sea of consciousness severed, their ethereal palace slashed into ruins. Without a chance to retaliate, they would be killed. Beyond Hong did not recognize the blue-clothed visitor, but he knew that his opponent was no weaker than him, so he was naturally very cautious. His right hand plunged into the sea of red flowers, as if he was grabbing something, and then he pulled it out. Incomparably bright star radiance seeped out from between his brows and his slightly white sideburns. What he pulled out of the sea of flowers was an illusory sword condensed from star radiance. A dazzling and pure sword glow illuminated the sky and the sea of flowers. It cut through countless streams of origin chi and slashed at the blue-clothed visitor. No matter how fierce the rain and wind of the sea are, let's see if they can block this sword of mine. The blue-clothed visitor had lived in the great western continent for many years. Although he was far away on the ocean, he had always been observing the experts of the continent. Relying on his authority and the assistance of White Emperor City, he had secretly gathered a great deal of information. He had a deep understanding of the fighting styles and strongest techniques of the continent's experts. As Byung Hong's sword slashed down, 17 methods to deal with it appeared in his sea of consciousness. The problem was that those 17 methods all dealt with the Byung Hong that he knew of, or more accurately, the Byung Hong from before the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. Today's Byung Hong was clearly much stronger than the reports and what he knew. Like Byung Hong's fist that had broken the harmonious sword style of Chun Chongsheng and Su Yurong. For example, his little red flower. No one would have thought that it could actually break its rope and turn into a sea of flowers, sealing off all the passages between heaven and earth. These methods were clearly Taoist techniques that Byung Hong had comprehended after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. If this was all, the blue-clothed visitor was still confident that he could force back Byung Hong. Perhaps he would have to pay a few injuries, but he would at least not be trapped here. But the greatest difference between the Byung Hong of today and the past was not that his Taoist techniques were more profound or that his techniques were more wondrous, but that his fighting style had changed. In the hearts of cultivators, Byung Hong was a gentle and composed senior expert. Even when he attacked, he had a sense of propriety, a deep sense of righteousness and gentleness. Today, Byung Hong's eyes were still calm, but his expression was no longer gentle. As he flew through the air, countless strands of true essence gushed out of his sleeves. Every move he made seemed to possess the power to shake mountains and move the earth. Every move seemed to see the heavens and earth, to see life and death, unbridled to the extreme, violent to the extreme. Why was this? The blue-clothed visitor saw Byung Hong's eyes and realized that while they were serene and serene, their depths contained an extremely resolute killing intent. And then he saw the white hairs of Byung Hong's temples. The visitor understood the reason. His heart sinking, he exploded with a fierce roar. Countless blue blades shattered into powder with this roar and then condensed into a halberd in the air. This halberd was gloomy and gloomy, its tip adorned with 3 extremely sharp thorns, exuding an awe-inspiring and terrifying aura. There was a high chance that the artifact spirit of the great western continent's divine artifact, the sea-calming halberd, had reappeared. Byung Hong's expression did not change. His hand gripped the illusory sword formed from star radiance and slashed at the green halberd. He had pulled this illusory sword out of the sea of flowers. It had no real substance, so it could be absolutely sharp and smooth, similar to Chun Chongsheng's stainless sword. But for some reason, a very bright petal was stuck to the blade of the sword, making it very striking. The illusory sword of star radiance and the dark green halberd met in the sky. A ball of chi emerged from the point of contact, its surface a white stream. Soon after, the ball of chi was torn to shreds by the boundless light and heat that erupted from the point of contact. Waves of chi and light and heat swept out in all directions, causing mud and stone to rustle down from the cliffs. Several hundred thick ancient trees snapped and then began to burn. The cultivators on the plateau could not clearly see what was happening in that blazing light. They could only faintly make out 2 figures. The Prince of Xiang calmly gazed in that direction, his brows slightly arched in thought. Wu Qianbai did not turn her head, but she sensed the change in that direction. Alarmed and bewildered, her hand also slowed. With a tearing sound, the fine strands of the horsetail whisk that bound the iron saber broke one by one, and a tear appeared on his sleeve. The light in the sky was still dazzling. Bright red petals madly danced as they retreated, a beautiful rain of petals. A trickle of golden blood trickled out of Byung Hong's ear, but he seemed to not notice, continuing to stare at the blue-clothed visitor with serene eyes. The illusory sword of star radiance and the dark green halberd clashed. The incomparably vigorous true essence and chi of these two experts of the divine domain were engaged in a most dangerous contest. Suddenly, the bright red petal on the blade of the illusory Sword of Star Radiance shattered into powder. This petal had come from the little red flower and contained a boundless divine might, secretly following the laws of the world. Yet it had been shattered by the clash of true essence between two experts. Countless fragments of petals shot toward the blue-clothed visitor, as swift as arrows and far more powerful. The blue-clothed visitor was currently fighting with Byung Hong with his halberd, so he could not dodge. With a grunt, he relied on his cultivation to endure. With a series of crackling sounds, countless holes appeared on the blue-clothed visitor's bamboo hat. Then, the hat shattered into pieces and was blown away by the wind, revealing the sinister-looking copper mask. Many marks also appeared on his body, from which blood faintly seeped out. Byung Hong would not let this chance go. With a clear whistle, the petals in the sky returned like lightning bolts, attacking the blue-clothed visitor. The blue-clothed visitor grunted, his true essence madly surging. Even at the risk of worsening his injuries, he managed to jolt Byung Hong's sword away. With a wave of his sleeves, he flew up into the sky, looking like a massive seabird. Byung Hong had already called back the red petals. He only needed to avoid this final attack, and then he could fly into the sky and escape. From a moment Byung Hong attacked to the moment he finally found a chance to escape, many things seemed to have happened, but only an extremely short amount of time had passed. If someone had been watching from the side with a timepiece, they would know that there was still an extremely short amount of time until 3 seconds passed. The blue-clothed visitor had also been silently counting. He was sure that he had not made a mistake. The petals in the sky had already reformed into that little red flower. It shot forward like a bolt of lightning and slammed into the blue-clothed visitor's body. With a crack, several of the visitor's ribs were broken and he vomited blood. But he seemed to feel nothing, not even grunting. Raising his halberd, he rose into the sky. He pushed his speed to the limit, quickly becoming a black dot in the eyes of the crowd. It seemed like he would melt into the sky in the next moment. In the next moment, the black dot grew larger and larger, gradually revealing figure. The blue-clothed visitor had returned. He had been forced back from the sky by a metal blade. Chapter 907. This situation had occurred because the blue-clothed visitor had made a miscalculation. Wu Qiongbai truly could block that blade for at least 3 seconds. The problem was that when Byung Hong attacked him with an unprecedented fearlessness, his wife, Wu Qiongbai, had naturally sensed it. Whether she truly understood why Byung Hong was doing this, or whether she was still confused and doubtful, it was only natural that she would slow down. In the end, the blade did not even need 3 seconds to cut through those whisks and cut through his Daoist sleeve. Thus, just when the blue-clothed visitor believed that he could finally escape, he saw that blade coming at him from the sky. A howl brimming with anger and unwillingness resounded through the sky and fell upon the mountains. It was followed by the howl of air being torn apart. A straight line descended from the sky to a certain place on the cliff. One could faintly make out the figures of 2 people at the very front. With a loud bang, smoke and dust rose from the cliff, and a cave entrance appeared. The entire mountain began to tremble. After several seconds, a certain place on the plateau suddenly bulged up and then split open, spewing out countless clouds of dust. The 2 figures flew out along with the smoke and dust, and then landed heavily on the ground. The 2 descended from the sky and entered the cliff, emerging from the summit. They had actually pierced through this solitary mountain. As the dust settled, one could clearly see that the blue-clothed visitor was kneeling on one knee, his hands clasping a pitch-black and lusterless blade. The man holding the blade was naturally Wang Pe. He did not turn around, but from his back, one could see the precipitous nature of the mountains and rivers. Byung Hong had already returned to the plateau. Bursting out of the dust, he punched at the blue-clothed visitor. The little red flower also left with it. The little red flower was missing a petal and seemed a little damaged, but its power was still terrifying. The blue-clothed visitor flipped his hands, using his halberd to block the blade. He stamped his foot, stirring up a plume of dust that attacked the little red flower. The little red flower bloomed once more, beautiful to the extreme and releasing a shrill whistle through the air. The blade once more slashed down without any reason. With a crisp crack, the green halberd broke into pieces. The blue-clothed visitor howled, his sleeves stirring up dust in an attempt to delay the blade for a few moments. But the dust could not obscure the color of the little red flower, much less restrain the blade glow. The red flower bloomed again. The iron saber slashed again. Swish, 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 swish. 3 unimaginably terrifying auras rose from the plateau and soared into the sky. The clouds in the blue sky fled in fear. Some of the slower ones were directly torn into shreds and disappeared without a trace. A battle between experts of the divine domain was enough to cause the world to change color. The gentle sounds of flowers blooming and the sharp sounds of blades falling continuously rang out in the dust. Bright red and bright light kept alternating. Suddenly, all the colors and light disappeared. With a loud bang, smoke and dust rose again. In the middle of the plateau, the ground with a circumference of about 2 miles had sunk down by half a foot. Then there was a long period of dead silence. The smoke and dust slowly settled. The first thing he saw was the smooth and flat ground that seemed to have been crushed countless times, as if it was paved with jade. The next to appear was Byung Hong. His clothes were full of holes, and blood with a faint golden luster flowed out slowly. He swayed a few times, a bright red appearing on his face, and then it rapidly paled. He had probably suffered a severe internal injury. Wang Po walked out of the dust, his right hand holding the blade, his left sleeve lightly swaying in the wind. Just like before, he habitually drooped his eyebrows and drooped his shoulders, making him seem rather wretched. But because he had lost his arm, his left shoulder drooped even lower, making it look rather unnatural. Blood was seeping out of it. In the battle just now, he had used his severed arm to receive a palm from the blue-clothed visitor, unwilling to let his blade slow for even an instant. Amongst the experts of the divine domain on the continent, Wang Po and Byung Hong could be considered the 2 strongest. Today, they had joined hands in battle, yet they had attacked so unyieldingly and resolutely, leaving no leeway. Their intentions were crystal clear. They would not give the blue-clothed visitor any chance to leave. They wanted the blue-clothed visitor dead. The blue-clothed visitor's bamboo hat had already been shattered, revealing the mysterious copper mask. There was a crack in the very center of the copper mask, straight and clear from top to bottom, most likely caused by the blade. The rest of the mask was covered in countless cracks. It seemed as beautiful as porcelain, but it was no longer as tough as before, appearing extremely fragile. The blue-clothed visitor's body swayed, a muffled sound coming from beneath the copper mask. Blood flowed out of that straight crack and then seeped out of those fine cracks. It was an extremely bizarre and abnormally terrifying sight. His body had already been severed of all life by Wang Po's blade and Byung Hong's flower. His insides were covered in countless cracks, and even his ethereal palace, star openings, and sea of consciousness were covered in a spiderweb of cracks. At any moment, it was impossible for him to survive. The several thousand ancient trees that had collapsed on the cliff were still burning, but under the cover of the damp clouds, the intensity of the fire was gradually diminishing. Presumably, it would soon be extinguished. Several hundred extremely fine plumes of dust rose from the plateau that had sunk by half a foot. It looked like a miniature tornado, gradually fading and about to be extinguished. This expert of the divine domain had reached the end of his life, but even now, no one knew who he was. The plateau was incomparably quiet. Byung Hong looked at the blue-clothed visitor. Everyone's gazes shifted back and forth between Byung Hong and the blue-clothed visitor, shocked and perplexed. Just what was going on here? Weren't Byung Hong and Wu Qiong by pursuing the Pope a moment ago to avenge their son's death? Why had this mysterious blue-clothed visitor suddenly appeared? Why was it that when this blue-clothed visitor wanted to kill Chen Changsheng, Not only did Byung Hong not help, he even stopped him. Even at the risk of being heavily injured, he still used such a resolute stance to attack, even giving off the impression that he was willing to perish together with the visitor. How did you know? The blue-clothed visitor finally spoke. He stared at Byung Hong, the eyes behind the copper mask still deep and serene, but already suffused with the aura of death. As he spoke, blood suffused with a golden luster seeped out of the cracks of various sizes on the mask, giving it a rather monstrous appearance. Priest Xian should not have appeared in Fengyang City. Byung Hong wiped the blood from the corner of his lips and said, his appearance was too deliberate. It felt like someone deliberately wanted him to be seen by us. This truly is a loophole, or perhaps a place where it's not perfect. The blue-clothed visitor continued. This was not my arrangement, but someone in your imperial court who wanted to conveniently wash him away. The people on the plateau could not understand this conversation, but there were naturally people who could. The Prince of Xiang's hands had already left his belt, his eyes moving as he thought of something. Chapter 908. The blue-clothed visitor added, but I think that this alone is not enough to make you believe that Chun Changsheng is the murderer. Byung Hong replied, correct, the chi of a black frost dragon cannot be faked. So even just now, I still believe that this matter was done by His Holiness the Pope. The blue-clothed visitor asked, then how can you be sure that I killed your son, or that you suspect me? The plateau was in an uproar at these words. Some people had already guessed that this was a plot against the Pope, but to hear the blue-clothed visitor personally admit it still left them shocked. I became suspicious because, on the way up the mountain, someone showed me a few things. Byung Hong waved his hand, causing several sheets of paper to float out of his sleeve. They quietly floated in the air, rustling in the wind. These sheets of paper were white, and on them were drawings drawn by someone using charcoal. The lines in these drawings were not complicated, but the details were extremely rich. In the first drawing, there was a small alley, an ancient scholar tree, and a young man. The young man's face was vividly drawn, his two eyebrows seemingly about to fly into the air, just like a real person. A hint of pain appeared on Byung Hong's face as he gazed at the young man in the drawing. The small alley and the ancient scholar tree were in a corner of Hanqiu City, and the young man was his son, Bi Tianxin. In the second drawing, there was a carriage. When the painter put down his brush, a gust of wind should have just happened to raise a corner of the curtain. What should have been a fleeting glimpse had been transformed by the painter's charcoal brush into a still and unchanging record. In the carriage window was a beautiful and proud young lady, as well as a blue-clothed visitor wearing a copper mask. It was the blue-clothed visitor on the plateau today. The contents of the other drawings were all different. For example, the waterfall outside Hanqiu City or the young man and woman walking side by side. Each drawing was an incomparably accurate record. One could clearly tell what Bi Tianxin had done in those few days and who he had met. After Bi Tianxin's death, these records had become clues. The blue-clothed visitor gazed at these drawings in silence for a very long time. Suddenly, he asked, "You believe these drawings?" Byung Hong replied, "I believe the person who painted the painting, but I was still skeptical. Your appearance in the end was the true proof. Now that I think about it, my actions today were indeed unwise. But if you weren't suspicious, you wouldn't have made such a quick decision. I still had the chance to kill Chun Changsheng and leave. Thinking about it this way, I still lost to this painter." The blue-clothed visitor looked at the paintings and said with a frown, "I said that I had everything in my grasp and that no one could break this trap. How could I have imagined that all of my movements were seen by this person? I don't know who was able to spy on me for so long without me noticing." Byung Hong replied, "Qiushan Jun." The visitor in green was slightly startled, not having expected this. Hearing this name, the crowd on the plateau became restless. Of course, Qiushan Jun was a celebrity, but he had been missing for 5 years. Many people had almost forgotten about his existence. No one would have thought that when he reappeared, he would have already done such a great thing. Bai Kai was even more shocked at these words. He looked at Go Hanshi and said, "Eldest brother? What's going on?" Gohan sure shook his head, indicating that he did not know. By the stream at the base of Holy Maiden Peak, the fragrance of roasted fish drifted further and further away. The rustling of the forest got closer and closer, and some of the more daring beasts even poking their heads out. Qiushan Jun tore off a piece of fish and threw it over, then turned around and said, "Father, it's useless even if you keep me here." The Qiushan clan head took the roasted fish in his hand and took 2 bites. He proudly said, "Don't think about deceiving me." Qiushan Jun helplessly said, "It's true, you came late. I just met with Sir B." The Qiushan clan had opened his mouth, not knowing what to say. Someone else might think that Byung-hong wouldn't believe a few words, but he was Qiushan Jun's father. He knew that his son had an excellent reputation, and crucially, his son had always been meticulous. Besides words, he assuredly had other tricks up his sleeves. The Qiushan clan head uneasily asked, "How confident are you?" Qiushan Jun replied, "After all, there's no direct evidence, and this matter involves the murder of his son. I think that Byung-hong will at most believe 30% of me." The Qiushan clan head somewhat relaxed. "That's fine. I hope that nothing unforeseen will happen." Qiushan Jun said, "If the blue-clothed visitor can't help but act today, 30% will become 90%. The Qiushan clan head's expression turned cold. "If I were him, I wouldn't even go to Holy Maiden Peak today, much less act." Qiushan Jun replied, "The blue-clothed visitor has an unfathomable cultivation and acts callously and emotionlessly, but in terms of strategy and patience, he is far inferior to father. Moreover, this is still Holy Maiden Peak, so Chen Changsheng assuredly still has tricks up his sleeve. Moreover, Wang Po might also come, so he might really act." Although his words were filled with praise for himself, the Qiushan clan head's heart still sank. Based on what Qiushan Jun said, if the blue-clothed visitor acted, Byung-hong would assuredly become suspicious. At that time, Chen Changsheng really might be able to survive. The Qiushan clan head gave him a resentful glance. If things have gotten to this point, then we can only think of some other methods. Confused, Qiushan Jun asked, "What else does Sir want to do?" The Qiushan clan head rallied his spirits and said, "If it really is as you say, once this matter is over, I naturally have to make a good proclamation of your achievements." Qiushan Jun helplessly said, "Today, I accompanied Sir by the stream and roasted a few fish to eat. What achievement is there?" The Qiushan clan head sternly said, "Have you ever thought that if the great Western continent scheme succeeds, His Holiness the Pope will die a wrongful death? More importantly, Byung-hong and his wife killing the Pope will assuredly cause the world to fall into chaos. The demons will assuredly invade, and the human race will assuredly be thrown into a storm. And now, all of this will not happen because of you." Qiushan Jun said, "This logic sounds rather strange." The Qiushan clan head became more and more agitated as he spoke, loudly saying, "How was it strange? Son, calling you the savior of our human race is not an exaggeration." Qiushan Jun helplessly said, "Father, this is a little too exaggerated." The Qiushan clan head said, "What do you know? Could it be that you can be sure that my previous conjecture will not become reality?" Qiushan Jun suddenly fell silent. The fish in the stream noiselessly dodged into the distance. The wild beasts in the forest also disappeared. After some time had passed, Qiushan Jun finally spoke. He looked into the Qiushan clan head's eyes and solemnly asked, "Father, since you also knew that those conjectures might be true, why did you do this?" This scheme was a scheme against the orthodoxy and Chen Changsheng. The people executing this scheme were the blue-clothed visitor and Mu Jiushi from the great Western continent. But everyone knew that the imperial court had assuredly known of this matter, though they did not know how deeply it had been involved. Qiushan Jun was even more certain that his father was an insider. Hearing this question, the Qiushan clan head also fell silent for a very long time. In the end, he still did not answer Qiushan Jun's question. He stood up, rubbed Qiushan Jun's head, and then left the stream. Chapter 909. Wu Qiongbai rushed to the center of the plateau and supported Bi Yanghong's tottering body. She stared at the blue-clothed visitor, her eyes so venomous that they seemed ready to devour him. She harshly yelled, "So, it was you. We husband and wife have never met you, and there is no grudge between us, so why did you poison my family's ex-INR? Your son was fated to die a violent death. I originally wanted to use his death to stir up a storm on the continent. It wasn't a bad idea, but alas," the blue-clothed visitor regretfully said, "I didn't think that His Holiness the Pope and the Holy Maiden, so young, would have such outstanding techniques. Otherwise, why would I have appeared?" These words were true. If Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong had not used their harmonious swords to repel Wu Qiongbai, he truly would not have needed to act. At that time, perhaps Chen Changsheng would have been defeated by Wu Qiongbai, or perhaps Bianghong would not have believed Qiu Shanjun's words. In the end, Chen Changsheng would have been in great danger. There's also that Qiu Shanjun, the blue-clothed visitor ruefully said, "The central continent truly has many young talents. In the distant ocean, we can't help but see the sky from the bottom of a well." Wang Pe said, "A few days ago outside Hanqiu City, I advised you that, although I did not know Honored Sir's identity, please do not interfere in the matters of the continent." Bianghong looked at the blue-clothed visitor and suddenly said, "If my guess is correct, you should be Mu." Compared to Wang Pe, he had been in the divine domain for much longer, so he still had some impression of stories from long ago. These words caused Wu Qiongbai, Huai Run, and the other martial grand aunts of South Stream Temple to turn pale in shock. The old lady of the Mutuo clan had not spoken much today, especially after Bi Yanghong and Wu Qiongbai had appeared. Now, she suddenly propped herself up on her walking stick and harshly rebuked the blue-clothed visitor. "You Westerners have actually come to stir up trouble again." The blue-clothed visitor was actually Mu. Mu was the surname of the imperial clan of the Great Western Continent. Using a single surname as a name was the most revered meaning in the human world in ancient times, and this custom still remained. Like Yin, like Shang, like Tianhai. The blue-clothed visitor had a single surname, Mu. He was the most extraordinary individual of the imperial clan of the Great Western Continent. In terms of seniority, he was probably the imperial uncle of the Great Western Continent, one generation higher than the Empress of White Emperor City. It was said that this person's realm was unfathomable, and he was extremely powerful. He was arrogant and cold. Back then, the chief princess of the Great Western Continent had been forced to leave her homeland and cross the sea to the continent, becoming the present empress of the demi-human race, Madame Mu. It was said that this imperial uncle believed that her talent was too astonishing, her temperament and talent too powerful, a threat to the rightful successor of the imperial clan. So he forced her to leave. Now that he thought about it, this rumor might not be true. The dragon breath of a black frost dragon truly could not be faked, at least not in the past. However, the demi-human race's founding was closely related to the black frost dragon tribe. If Madame Mu had found some sort of secret technique in White Emperor City, it would not be too difficult to believe. Bianghong looked at the blue-clothed visitor and asked, "The girl in the painting is presumably Mu Jiushi?" The man in blue said, "Bai Yexing and I have a very bad relationship, but he has always doted on his sister-in-law. Do you dare to go to White Emperor City to find her?" Bianghong replied, "Let alone White Emperor City. Even if she hid in the abyss behind Shiwalao City, I would still kill her." The blue-clothed visitor said, "Then I'll go ahead and wait for you there." After saying this, he turned to a certain place to the west. There was mist, rain, and wind, but it was beyond his line of sight, impossible to see. With a clatter, the copper shards stained with golden blood fell to the ground at his feet like golden leaves. Even at the final moment, no one was able to see the face of the strongest expert of the Great Western Continent's imperial clan. In the countless rays of golden light, one could faintly make out an aged face. The light grew brighter and brighter, and then suddenly vanished. This person no longer existed in the world. Only the copper shards on the ground showed that something had happened here. This was a long winter day. Because too many things had happened, time seemed to pass particularly slowly. In truth, Not much time had passed from the moment the three martial grand aunts of South Stream Temple said they wanted to close the temple, to Qin Changxing's unyielding opposition, to Wu Qiangbai's resentful voice, and to this moment. In this short period of time, the 3 seconds after the blue-clothed visitor struck were the most crucial. The blue-clothed visitor had struck because of his judgment of the situation on the plateau. If Wang Po had not appeared, he would have never struck. Wang Po's blade had appeared because the White Tiger Divine General had launched a sneak attack on Qin Changsheng. For an expert of this level to use a sneak attack, even he believed that Qin Changsheng would not be able to handle it. The blue-clothed visitor did not think so. He believed that, as the Pope, Qin Changsheng would assuredly have countless life-saving methods. So he had prepared to take advantage of the chaos to strike. Wang Po's blade had already appeared, so who could stop him? He had not expected that while he had been waiting for Wang Po's blade to appear, someone else had also been waiting for him to appear. And that person was Biang Hong, who he had never imagined. This was the story that had taken place in those 3 seconds. Looking back, this story began with the White Tiger Divine General spear. If the White Tiger Divine General had not attempted to kill Qin Changsheng, none of this would have happened. So where would this story end? Would it end like this? No. This heaven-shaking battle between experts of the divine domain had ended. The blue-clothed visitor was dead, but Qin Changsheng was still alive. The White Tiger Divine General put away his spear, glanced at Qin Changsheng, and then turned to walk back. When he glanced at Qin Changsheng, the expression on his face was very indifferent, the meaning he wanted to express very clearly. Your Holiness, your fate is truly not bad. Qin Changsheng gazed at his back, his expression calm, but he did not put down his sword. The sword intent began to be faint and indistinct, then condensed and became pure, from plain to swift and fierce to awe-inspiring. The surrounding grass sensed it and rose up, stabbing into the sky. The White Tiger Divine General had naturally sensed this sword intent. The meaning that this sword intent wanted to express was very clear. General, do you really want to leave like this? The White Tiger Divine General did not stop. He did not care about this, a mocking smile appearing on his lips. Your Holiness the Pope, I truly did kill you just now, but so what? Your cultivation level is lower than mine, your battle prowess is lower, and your body is heavily injured. Even if you have countless magical artifacts and treasures on your body, do you really think that you can kill me? Of course, that blade can kill me. Although Wang Po is also heavily injured, do you think that His Highness will just coldly watch? As for the future, I can return to the capital and become Minister of War. Your Holiness the Pope, do you dare to return to the capital? Or perhaps I can return to White Tiger Pass. I have tens of thousands of soldiers and countless experts and array masters under my command. What can your Holiness do to me? These were all thoughts going on in his mind, so naturally no one could hear them. But both his indifferent and proud expression and Qin Changxing's unwillingness to put down his sword were enough to explain the current situation. Several Taoists from the Monastery of Eternal Spring flew out from the Imperial Court's diplomatic mission and came to the center of the plateau to receive them. Their blue clothes drifted in the wind, blocking Qin Changxing's line of sight from the White Tiger Divine General's back. Suddenly, a green leaf fell. The color of these green leaves was a little lighter than the green clothes worn by the Taoists, making them seem lighter. These were the leaves of the Wutong tree. Several hundred zhang away, Su Yurong gripped her bow with both hands. There was no arrow on the string, but the Wu arrow had already been fired. It was those green leaves. Chapter 9:10. The green leaf suddenly shot forward, transforming into a sharp arrow that shot toward the blue-clothed Taoists. The blue-clothed Taoists sensed the power contained within the Wu arrow. Their expressions instantly chilled, and they did not dare to be careless. Gloomy sword glows enveloped their bodies. Taking advantage of this chance, Qin Changsheng used the Yesher step, moving from Do Shun to Nyo Su. Like a wisp of smoke, he stabbed at the White Tiger Divine General's back. The White Tiger Divine General had no time to turn around. His expression twitching, his spear flew through the air. He had been rather surprised that Su Yorong had suddenly attacked, but he had long since been prepared for Chun Chongqing's attack. Countless strands of star radiance seeped out of the chinks in his armor, shining brilliantly and condensing into a surface of light. Its surface was extremely smooth, its form perfect and without a single hole. Chun Chongqing's sword moved like a bolt of lightning, avoiding the spear's block and stabbing forward, but it failed to pierce through this surface of light. This was the first time he had encountered such a situation ever since he had learned the sword from Su Li in the wilderness. Before this, his intellectual sword had always been able to pierce through the defenses of both divine General Shui, he, and experts of Xiaoda's level. Could this person actually have a perfect star domain? Countless sword slashes, light, and heat sputtered between the two. Through these rays of light, Chun Chongqing could see the White Tiger Divine General's extremely indifferent face. When Su Li had evaluated the current generation of cultivators in the wilderness, he had said that none of these fellows possessed a truly perfect star domain. Today, the White Tiger Divine General's performance seemed to overturn this judgment. Chun Chongqing could sense that this person truly was powerful, infinitely close to Shui Xingchuan's. Whether he used the intellectual sword or the blazing sword, he would find it very difficult to break through this person's defenses, at least in the short term. The White Tiger Divine General naturally understood this even better. He looked at Chun Chongqing through the rays of light, his eyes tinged with faint disdain. Suddenly, a hint of pain appeared in his eyes, scattering that disdain and transforming it into boundless shock. His star domain, which could be said to be perfect, had actually been torn open. What was going on here? Before Chun Chongqing's sword clashed with the White Tiger Divine General's spear, a person walked out of the Imperial Court's diplomatic mission. In both appearance and clothes, this person was extremely ordinary, so unremarkable that he had not attracted any attention at the very start. That person's footsteps seemed to be very slow, but he soon arrived at the center of the cliff plateau, several thousand feet away. That person's footsteps were very light, so light that there was no sound, not even the sound of the wind. It was as if there was not even a breath or smell. Not even the White Tiger Divine General, who was at the peak of star condensation, had sensed that he had arrived behind him. The man was like a true specter, standing quietly behind the White Tiger Divine General and staring indifferently at the back of his neck. Finally, someone noticed this strange scene and felt a chill run down his spine. Someone from the Imperial Court's diplomatic mission reacted and wanted to warn them, but it was already too late. The man raised his hands and attacked the back of the White Tiger General's neck. Several extremely sharp and bone-chilling scars appeared in front of his hands, looking like two wolf claws. This was the calmest sneak attack, as well as the most intelligent combat method. No matter how perfect your star domain was, I would break it with force. The sharp wolf claws fell and tore a hole in the White Tiger Divine General's perfect and smooth surface of starlight. This hole was very small. If one did not look carefully, they would not even notice it. The lethality of these two wolf claws seemed to find it very difficult to injure the White Tiger Divine General. But in the eyes of the truly powerful personages present, these two wolf claws were the most dangerous of existences. They vaguely saw a ferocious wild wolf sneaking up behind a prey, lowering its head indifferently to bite the prey's neck. Only when the sharp wolf teeth pierced through the prey's veins and even bit off its head did the prey realize what had happened. Who else could such a dangerous and skilled sneak attack be? It was naturally Zhixiu. The Prince of Xiang's eyes suddenly chilled. Flames blazed in their depths, turning into a great sun that seemed to crackle with electricity. A cold wind rose from his feet, howling around his swollen waist like it was about to become a new belt. He sensed that something might have happened to the White Tiger Divine General and was determined to save him. But Wang Po's gaze fell on his body. His empty sleeve fluttered in the wind, looking like the thread tied to a paper aureole on the verge of falling. Bi Yanghong also looked at the Prince of Xiang, the broken thread hanging from his pinky gently drifting in the wind while the bright red petals uneasily danced behind him. The Prince of Xiang narrowed his eyes, his hands gripping his belt. It was hard to say whether he would strike next. The standoff between the three experts of the divine domain lasted for only a very short moment. Because in a very short moment, the outcome of the battle had been decided, and life and death had been decided. Chen Chongqing's sword was like the shadow left behind by a white crane flying down from the sky over a cold pool in the mountains. It swept past the mountainous spear and flew forward. Zhuxiu's hands were like branches buried by the cold light of the northern demon moon. The unalarmed spear landed on the back of his opponent's neck. The White Tiger Divine General knew that someone had come and destroyed his perfect star domain, but he did not know where that person was. He also had no energy to care about where that person was, because Chen Chongqing's sword had already arrived. That dagger, so bright and clean that it seemed to have been washed in autumn waters, combined with the vault sheath, made its killing intent even brighter and sharper. The gap that had been torn open in the White Tiger Divine General star domain was very small, but as long as there was a gap, it could be pierced through by a boundless sharpness. The stainless sword pierced through the gap and arrived in front of the White Tiger Divine General, leaving behind a trail of blood. The White Tiger Divine General roared, his true essence madly circulating. Star radiance bloomed like a flower in full bloom, gushing into the world. In the next moment, the bright star radiance suddenly dimmed, because an even brighter sword glow had appeared in the world. Countless sword glows surged out of Chen Chongqing's hands, like fish swimming against the current, like fireworks on a certain night in the capital. It was an incredibly beautiful and spectacular sight. Countless sword cries rose and fell, their cries incessant, sharp sword intense cutting at everything in the center of the plateau. Whether it was the hard ground or armor, they were all cut to pieces. The gap in the perfect star domain gradually grew larger and larger in the dazzling sword glows. The summit was deathly still. The only sound was the constant hum of swords and the rushing of the wind. Many people knew of the Pope's most famous technique, the simultaneous attack of 1,000 swords, but seeing it with their own eyes still left them speechless with shock. These sword glows were the famed swords of the Garden of Zhou's sword pool. This sort of sword technique was the Pope's strongest move. At least several hundred famed swords slashed at the White Tiger Divine General like a river. Even if the White Tiger Divine General was powerful, had undergone a perfect purification, and had an extremely vigorous, true essence, how could he endure? In a flash, several dozen sword wounds appeared on his muscular body, blood spurting out like a torrential rain. Chapter 9:11. From a certain perspective, Chen Chongqing's sword Dao was somewhat unreasonable. As long as he could break his opponent's star domain, then even if his opponent's cultivation realm was far higher than his, they would still find it very troublesome. 3 years ago, on that snowy day in the capital, he had charged into the alley of the Northern Military Department, sword in hand. Even an expert of the Proclamation of Liberation like Xiaoda and several dozen high-level assassins from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the Department for Purging officials had been unable to do anything to him. A hint of regret appeared in the White Tiger Divine General's eyes before it was shattered by the sword light. He knew that he had underestimated his opponent, but he wouldn't give up. As he waved his iron spear, he created layers of iron curtains in front of him. At the same time, he narrowed his eyes and stared at Chen Chongqing's eyes. The more swords one used, the more true essence and divine sense would be consumed. This was a truth that everyone knew. In his opinion, no matter how vigorous Chen Chongqing's true essence was, no matter how calm his divine sense was, under the torrential rain of hundreds of swords, it was impossible for him to withstand for too long. He believed that as long as he persevered for a period of time, or even just a few breaths' time, Chen Chongqing's true essence and divine sense would be exhausted. There would be time for him to counterattack. The iron spear in his hand carried a swift and fierce feeling. He swung it even faster, and his defense became even tighter. He didn't even care about the sword lights that slashed towards his legs and arms. He only protected his vital parts, blocking Chen Chongqing's hundreds of swords and the enemy, whose position he couldn't determine. He waited for the moment to counterattack. There was nothing wrong with this idea. In fact, it could even be said to be the safest strategy. But after a few breaths, he shockingly discovered that Chun Changsheng's true essence and divine sense didn't feel exhausted at all. There wasn't even a sign of weakening. What was going on? Even if he had started cultivating, meditating, and meditating since he was in his mother's womb, it was still impossible for him to possess so much star radiance true essence. Moreover, why was his divine sense so calm? He didn't feel like a young man at all, but more like an old priest who had been in seclusion in a Taoist temple for hundreds of years. Sword light filled the sky, unending. The sound of the sword piercing through the air was incessant. The White Tiger Divine General was shocked speechless. Then, he felt a great sense of alarm. If he had forcefully retreated at the risk of being injured, he might have been able to avoid the rain of swords. But he wanted to defend and counterattack, so he missed the best opportunity, and now he could no longer find a chance to leave. It was like a water snake in a stream. With the arrival of winter, the water temperature gradually dropped, but because it was greedy for the delicious taste of the fish that might be slowed down by the low temperature, it hesitated for a while, but did not leave the mountain stream. In the end, it did not get to eat the fish, but was frozen into the ice and died. It seemed like a long process, but to the spectators, it was only a few breaths of time. The cup of tea was still boiling hot, and the incense had just begun. The White Tiger Divine General knew that he had to risk his life. He madly circulated his true essence, his iron spear piercing through the air, using his strongest mountain-seeking strike, in an attempt to force Chun Changsheng to withdraw his sword and defend. The rain of swords that filled the sky suddenly retracted, hovering in the air around Chun Changsheng, creating countless sparks, barely managing to block this spear. The sky was blue after the rain. With a flash of blue light, two hands covered in black hair landed on the back of the White Tiger Divine General's neck. The White Tiger Divine General let out a muffled groan as his spear smashed into the ground. His berserk, true essence borrowed the momentum of the ground to return behind him. But the sword cried out once more. Countless fierce sword intents severed the rock veins at the bottom of the plateau, forcefully severing his spear energy. The White Tiger Divine General let out a fierce howl. Borrowing the remaining energy of the spear, he wanted to fly up and escape the danger of being pincered. A dazzling sword glow flashed before his eyes and then fled into the sky. 10 fierce blue glows suddenly appeared above his head and vanished into the air. The White Tiger Divine General's howl came to a screeching halt. All was quiet on the plateau. A sword stabbed into his chest. There was a hole there, and blood was flowing out from it. There was a light crack. A pair of hands had twisted his neck. His head limply drooped to the side. The second-ranked Divine General of the Great Zhou, the White Tiger Divine General, was at the peak of star condensation. His cultivation was already close to Xue Xingchuan's. In every aspect, he was stronger than Chun Changsheng and Zhi Xiu. But today he had been jointly attacked by Chun Changsheng and Zhi Xiu. Let alone victory, he hadn't even found a chance to counterattack. He collapsed on the plateau, blood spurting from his wounds. Carrying with him a sense of unwillingness, despair, and confusion, he died. The plateau was still deathly still. Too many things had happened today, the situation changing too quickly. Even now, there were still many people who could not react. South Stream Temple had decided to close the temple and hold a grand ceremony, inviting the imperial court and the various sects to observe the ceremony, but Pope Chun Changsheng had firmly rejected it. However, Chun Changsheng had suddenly become the true culprit behind Bi Tianxin's death, the target of vengeance for Bi Yanghong and Wu Qiongbai. Just when Wu Qiongbai was about to kill Pope Chun Changsheng, Holy Maiden Su Yurong suddenly emerged from seclusion. The two's harmonious sword style shocked everyone present. When Bi Yanghong broke the harmonious sword style, he was obstructed by Su Yurong's Tong Bao and Wu arrows. The White Tiger Divine General used this chance to launch a sneak attack on Chun Changsheng. Wang Po's blade from beyond the heavens wanted to save him, but he was obstructed by Wu Qiongbai. At this moment, The mysterious blue-clothed visitor from the great western continent unleashed a thunderous strike at Chen Changsheng that no one could stop. It seemed like no one could stop him, but it seemed like at the time, all the people present who had the ability to stop him were either being stopped or had no reason to stop him. Bianghong was the latter. His attack had directly changed the situation and exposed the true mystery. The blue-clothed visitor's scheme had been exposed, and then he had died. Logically speaking, this story should have ended here, but it had not. If the White Tiger Divine General's first attack represented the stance of the imperial court and the venerable Taoist Shang Xingzhou, then the White Tiger Divine General's death naturally represented the stance of the orthodoxy and Pope Qin Changsheng. Qin Changsheng had personally killed this person. There was no stance in the world more clear-cut than this. The Prince of Xiang slightly narrowed his eyes and asked Qin Changsheng, "Your Holiness, you just killed him?" Qin Changsheng said nothing. The person who answered the Prince of Xiang was Hu 32. The bishop snapped. This person attempted to assassinate His Holiness the Pope, committing a heinous crime that deserves 10,000 deaths. It was just like a few days ago in the old estate in Wenshui City. Tang 36 wanted the Tang second master to die immediately before the sun set over the mountains. The White Tiger Divine General dared to attack Qin Changsheng, so he also had to die. He had to die on the spot, die in front of everyone. The Prince of Xiang said nothing more. Bianghong looked at him and said, "Once I go to White Emperor City and kill Mu Jiushi, I will go to the capital and ask the venerable Taoist if he knows of this matter." Then he turned to Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong and said, "My apologies." Finally, he and Wang Pu exchanged their farewells and then left with Wu Qiongbai. As the somewhat desolate figures of this couple shot into the sky and vanished into the sea of clouds, the people on the plateau all had different emotions, some of them feeling sympathy. I've been rather tired recently, and time is rather tight. In the next half-month, I will do my best to write 2 chapters a day, but I might not have time to revise them. There will definitely be many mistakes and omissions. I ask for everyone's understanding. Chapter 9:12. The Prince of Xiang prepared to leave. Su Yurong said, "Prince, please wait a moment." The Prince of Xiang stopped and looked at her. "Is there some divine decree?" Su Yurong said, "When I was young, I didn't have a high evaluation of the prince. Now that I think about it, it was because I didn't have enough experience." The Prince of Xiang calmly replied, "The Holy Maiden's praise is too much. I do not deserve it." With the imperial court's diplomatic mission leaving the summit, there was no need for Wang Pu to remain. "I need to recuperate for a period of time. Everyone, take care," he said to Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong. Experts of the divine domain had already comprehended the laws of the world. Even if they were defeated by experts of the same level, they would still find it very difficult to kill them. Today, he and Bianghong had worked together to kill the blue-clothed visitor, not giving him a single chance and paying a heavy price. Su Yurong suggested, "It would be better to quietly recuperate at South Stream Temple. Scholarly Manor isn't far, and I still have some unfinished business to attend to, so it's not convenient to disturb you." As Wang Pu said this, he glanced at the 3 martial grandaunts of South Stream Temple. Everyone present knew what he meant. Huairen's expression did not change. Huaishu was slightly angry, and Huaibai's expression changed slightly. Huaibai was well aware that she would inevitably be reprimanded for her actions today. She had originally intended to leave with the imperial court's diplomatic mission, but she had not expected the Prince of Xiang to remain silent. The vice principal of Scholarly Manor, Zhong Hui, and the other disciples stepped forward, bowed to Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong, then escorted Wang Pu down the mountain. The old matriarch of the Mutuo clan and the patriarch of the Wu clan were the next to leave. When the 2 leaders bid farewell to Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong, their expressions were very humble and their attitudes were very proper. For thousands of years, these aristocratic families had never been wrong when choosing sides. Whether it was between the Liang and the Chun, between Emperor Taizong and the King of Chu, or between the Tianhai Divine Empress and the Imperial clan. Before today, they were naturally on the side of Dao Master Shang Xingzhou and the imperial court, but what happened today would definitely have an impact on their attitudes. The unification of the East and West between the continent and the Great Western Continent was the next major event of the human race after the unification of the North and South, and it was pushed forward by Shang Xingzhou and the imperial court. However, following the union of Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong, the union of the East and West had already become a bubble. The Great Western Continent scheme had been exposed, the blue-clothed visitor dead, but everyone knew that the shadow of the imperial court was behind this scheme. Otherwise, Byonghong would not have left behind those words brimming with killing intent before leaving. The sudden return of South Stream Temple's 3 martial grandants and their forceful push to close the temple was also assuredly related to the imperial court. From the looks of it, the imperial court had failed in both cases. This would definitely shake the minds of the aristocratic families. If the Tang family was really determined to remain neutral in the future, they would have to make a new choice. I'll send the 2 elders off. Tang 36 glanced at Chen Changsheng, then piled a smile on his face as he supported the old lady of the Mutuo family towards the carriage. He didn't forget to chat with the head of the Wu family. For example, how was the young lady's health? Was cousin Mei still as bitter as when she was young? Did she not like to eat when the weather was hot? Soon after, the cultivators of the various sects came forward, bowed to Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong, and then took their leave. Today, everyone had come to Holy Maiden Peak to observe South Stream Temple's closing ceremony. But who dared to bring up this topic? The 3 martial grandants of South Stream Temple had rather grave expressions, especially Huai Bai, whose complexion was extremely gloomy and unsightly. From breaking through the wall and descending into the plateau to now, Su Yurong had not said a single word to them, not even glancing at them. The last to take their leave were the disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect. Go Hanshi bowed to Su Yurong and said, I should have stayed behind to see if there's anything I need help with, but senior brother might already be here. For the sake of safety, I should first go find him. Since Byonghong had received Qiushan Jun's message on his way up the mountain, Qiushan Jun had naturally come today. As for why he still had not appeared, different people had different guesses, but presumably it had something to do with Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng. Su Yurong fell quiet for a while, then said to Go Hanshi, Senior brother, be careful on the road. If you see him, thank him for me. Go Hanshi replied, Senior brother might not want to hear this thank you. Su Yurong said, then ask him why he hasn't come to see me. As she said this, she did not look at Chen Changsheng. Yi Xiaoyan and the other disciples of South Stream Temple subconsciously turned to Chen Changsheng, somewhat nervous. In their view, in front of the Pope, how could the Holy Maiden speak like this? Chen Changsheng did not notice these gazes. He was currently chatting with Zhuxiu under the tree. It was unclear what they were talking about, but Chen Changsheng's expression was rather solemn, while Zhuxiu remained silent. Go Hanshi had originally wanted to bid farewell to them, but as he saw this scene, he became pensive and did not step forward. He led the disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect down the plateau. The imperial court's diplomatic mission had already left, and the cultivators from the various sects and noble clans had also retreated. The stone path was very quiet, and not a single sound could be heard in the awe-inspiring forest. Presumably, the birds and beasts inhabiting the forest had long since been frightened away by the several world-shaking battles that had just occurred. As the disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect descended the mountain, they discussed the events of the day with great enthusiasm. Who could have imagined that the situation would change so quickly? I heard Senior Brother's words and was just about to raise my sword and go out to kill, but I didn't even have time to unsheathe my sword. Bai Kai recalled those hair-raising scenes and excitedly said 5 experts of the divine domain, 4 of them personally taking the field, and a vicious person like the White Tiger Divine General actually died like this. When I get back, I have to tell Junior sister about this. If she knows that Zhuxiu was the one who struck in the end, she'll definitely be very happy. Go Hanshi smiled, but said nothing. Bai Kai continued, Chen Changsheng truly is formidable, and Junior sister Su, The Holy Maiden is also formidable, and their unity sword art is even more formidable. But the most formidable is still eldest brother. If not for him, how could the great Western Continent scheme have been so easily exposed? How could Senior Byung Hong and Wang Pa have set up a trap to kill the blue-clothed visitor? In his view, eldest brother, who had not appeared from start to finish, was the most important person, so he spoke with a very proud expression. The disciples of the Mount Lee Sword sect nodded their heads in agreement, saying that if not for eldest brother, Chun Changsheng would have found it impossible to break out of this trap. Even if he had Wang Po's help, the only thing that awaited him in the end was death. Even if the disciples of the Mount Lee Sword sect had drawn their swords and helped him, he might not have died, but he would still have ended up in a rather sorry state. At this moment, a clear and bright voice that was clearly too lazy came from the depths of the forest. Where did this nonsense come from? Bai Kai's expression instantly chilled. Just when he was about to question the speaker, he suddenly felt that this voice was very familiar, and his expression changed. Chapter 9:13. In the depths of the forest, there was a clear and shallow stream. A grill was placed on a rock by the stream, and there were some leftover fish. Qiu Shanjun took a freshly roasted fish from the grill and stuffed it into Bai Kai's hands. Let's see if you can learn to keep your mouth shut when eating fish. Bai Kai was a little nervous. He took the fish and began to eat seriously, not daring to make any comments. The disciples of the Mount Lee Sword sect unsheathed their swords and went into the stream to stab the fish. For a moment, the sound of water splashing could be heard, accompanied by endless laughter. Qiu Shanjun used the stream water to wash his hands and sat on a rock with Go Hanshi. Go Hanshi replied, I didn't expect that after you left the Mount Song Army headquarters, you actually took a detour from Hanshio City. You arrived several days later than stated in the letter. Qiu Shanjun replied, I left Sloping Cliff and went to the Mount Song Army headquarters. I saw my family, so I followed them. With Go Hanshi's intelligence, he immediately realized the problem in this sentence and asked, Who is it? Qiu Shanjun was silent for a moment, then said, Chun Changsheng. When he and Go Hanshi began to talk, the noise in the stream became much quieter. When he said Chun Changsheng's name, he attracted the attention of all his juniors. And when he finished telling the story of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm, the stream became even quieter, everyone silent for a very long time. Go Hanshi was also speechless. He looked at him as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Bai Kai's face was completely red, and he almost choked to death on the unchewed fish. What do you want to say? Qiu Shanjun said expressionlessly. Go Hanshi smiled and shook his head, indicating that he had no comment on this matter. With great difficulty, Bai Kai swallowed the fish, then repeatedly shook his head, indicating that he didn't dare make any evaluation of eldest senior brother. Qiu Shanjun looked at him and said, If you want to say it, say it. Bai Kai hesitated for a very long time, then whispered, Eldest brother, isn't your eyesight a bit too bad? Chun Changsheng is a good person. Qiu Shanjun paused for a moment, then continued, Unfortunately, we can't be friends. He didn't know that Chun Changsheng had the same feeling. Go Hanshi smiled and said, In this aspect, I'm stronger than all of you, because I can be friends with all of you. Bai Kai squeezed onto a rock and squatted beside Qiu Shanjun, saying, Eldest senior, you're the truly amazing one. No matter how strong Chun Changsheng is, he still had to rely on you to escape unscathed today. This was referring to how Qiu Shanjun had used tinsum paintings to convince Byung Hong and break the Great Western Continent scheme. However, there was no pride or complacency on Qiu Shanjun's face. Instead, there was some sadness. I don't like Tianxin, so I didn't care too much at the start and treated this matter too lightly. I didn't think that the people of the Great Western Continent would actually dare to act against him. After a moment of silence, he said, If I had been more vigilant, perhaps he wouldn't have died. Go Hanshi was quiet for a while, then patted him on the back and asked, South Stream Temple has closed. Should we do anything? Junior sister has never needed anyone to worry about her. Zhixio seems to have some problems. We'll talk about it when we get back. Shoshan Jun stood up and walked out of the forest. The Mountly Sword sect disciples in the stream hurriedly came out of the water and used their true essence to dry their clothes. Carrying tinsome fresh fish, they followed. The mountain path was still quiet and secluded. The birds felt safe and returned to the forest. Clear and pleasant chirps could be heard from all around. From some distant cliff, the playful cries of monkeys could be heard. Shoshan Jun listened for a few moments, then took a sip from the wine pot and led his junior brothers down a mountain path, his robes fluttering in the wind. The plateau at the summit was already empty, but the plateau in front of South Stream Temple was packed with people. Several hundred inner sect disciples of South Stream Temple quietly stood amidst the trees and flowers. They were no longer as nervous as they had been a few days ago. When they smelled the fragrance of the flowers, some young girls couldn't help but take a whiff. The problem had still not been resolved, but since the Holy Maiden had come out of seclusion, what did these disciples have to worry about? In the deepest part of South Stream Temple, at the very top of the thatched cottage, 2 prayer mats had been placed. Su Yurong and Chun Changsheng sat on them. Huaishu slightly frowned at this sight, somewhat displeased. Huaibai was silent, seemingly thinking about something. Huai Ren slowly said, "His Holiness the Pope has suffered significant injuries. It is best if he first goes to rest." The meaning of this extremely senior martial grandaunt of South Stream Temple was crystal clear. No matter what Su Yurong thought about the closing of the temple, what she thought about their actions after returning from their travels, this was still an internal matter of South Stream Temple. Since it was an internal matter, it should be resolved by South Stream Temple itself. Even if Chun Changsheng was the Pope, he should not be sitting here. However, her words did not receive any response. The several hundred South Stream Temple disciples standing within the thatched cottage and amidst the flowering trees were calm and silent, as if they had not heard. Su Yurong also seemed not to hear. She only quietly gazed at Ping Xian and Yi Chun. Before entering seclusion in the stone wall at the summit, she had placed the affairs of South Stream Temple in the hands of these 2 senior sisters. Her calm gaze clearly indicated that she wanted them to give an explanation for today's events. Huai Ren sighed, wanting to say something. Su Yurong continued to ignore her, only quietly gazing at Ping Xian and Yi Chun. Although they were all disciples of the same generation, Ping Xian and Yi Chun had long ago gotten down on their knees. Yi Chun's eyes were moist as she said in a trembling voice, "I truly do not know what to do." With these words, tears began to flow from her eyes. Su Yurong knew that Yi Chun had always had a gentle personality. Presumably, she had been forced by her teacher last night to the point where she could not hold on any longer, which was why she had agreed to the closing of the temple on the plateau. Ping Xian was much calmer. This disciple knows her wrongs, but Master is still old and weak, and she does not have evil thoughts. Temple Master, please show mercy. Huairen was taken aback. She had not expected that this disciple who had defied her several times today on the plateau would now plead for mercy on her behalf. But she did not accept these words, because even now, she still believed that she was correct. She calmly recounted the events of the last few days to Su Yurong. Just like last night and today, she explained why she wanted South Stream Temple to close for 10 years. From start to finish, Su Yurong said nothing, only quietly listened. Huairan said, "Today's matter seems to have been peacefully resolved, but Holy Maiden, in breaking out of seclusion, you must have paid an enormous price." Chen Changshan glanced at Su Yurong. Huairan continued, "What if this sort of thing keeps happening in the future? Holy Maiden, how many more times can you pay this price? How many more times can Holy Maiden Peak pay this price? The Imperial Court and the Li Palace, the war between master and disciple. Why must the disciples of our temple bleed?" At this moment, Su Yurong finally spoke. Her voice was very soft, but it was also very clear. All the disciples of South Stream Temple and the flowering trees could clearly hear it, and it went straight into Huai Ren's heart. Martial Aunt is a senior, so it's only right that she's concerned about the affairs of the temple. But you're not the temple master, or do you mean you want to sit in my position? Chapter 9:14. All was quiet within and without South Stream Temple. Huiran could not answer this question. She knew that there was no way to salvage the situation, but when she imagined the scene of the temple being destroyed and the people dying, she still wanted to make one final attempt at persuasion. I know that this truly is against the laws of the church, but I cannot just watch as you drag my South Stream Temple into the abyss. She looked at Su Yurong and Chun Changsheng and said, "You do not have the right to do this." Su Yurong stood up and calmly looked into her eyes. Before teacher left, she once said to me that South Stream Temple is full of female cultivators with weak natures. It is extremely difficult for them to survive in this chaotic world, and to calmly guard their Tao hearts to cross the world is even more naive. It is not the true Tao of South Stream Temple. Huiran asked, "Have you and senior sister never thought that the world is like the overflowing river of hatred? If one is not careful, the boat will capsize and the people will perish?" Su Yurong replied, "Cultivating the Tao has always been a heaven-defying act. Even a weak woman should uphold the Tao and advance. Standing by the river and viewing the scenery for an entire lifetime is admittedly wonderful and free, but if one is not even willing to wet the soles of one's shoes, how can one tread on the waves and ultimately reach the other shore?" These words caused the flowering trees to sway in the wind, and the eyes of the disciples of South Stream Temple brightened. When I was little, at New North Bridge in the capital, I jumped into that well, and when I stood on the bridge, I jumped into the Luo Canal. Everyone thought that I was seeking death, but they didn't know that I only wanted to jump in and see if there was a moon, if there was a legendary evil dragon. I even dared to do these things, so how could I jump into the river? As Su Yurong spoke, Chun Changxing glanced at her. Before the battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, he had carefully studied her and was well aware of these anecdotes from her childhood in the capital. Master chose me to be Holy Maiden because she clearly understood my personality and knew where I would take South Stream Temple. Su Yurong looked at Huiran and said, "I can respect your dislike of my conduct, dislike of teacher's choice, but you want to change all this?" "No." Her voice was still very soft, like the most pleasant cry of a bird in a tranquil valley. She did not deliberately release her dignity, but she gave off an unquestionable feeling. These last two words in particular made many of the South Stream Temple disciples, including Ping Xian and Yi Chun, recall that Chun Changsheng had said the same two words on the plateau. "I can respect you, I can understand you, but I won't accept you, I won't be convinced by you, and I definitely won't be changed by you. If I can't, then I can't." However, Chun Changsheng remembered the shout that came from the old estate in the snowstorm of Wenshui City a few days ago. "Your son is colluding with the demons." As for fame, he had only started slowly accumulating it after the grand examination. As for Su Yurong and Qiu Shanjun, they had been raising them since the day they were born. They had not lived in this world for as long as those senior experts, but in terms of reputation, how many people could compare to them? The debate came to an end. Su Yurong was the will of South Stream Temple. In these 10 or so green peaks, no one could shake her position, and it was even to the extent that they couldn't approach her. Even if the ones who opposed her today were the 3 granduncles with the highest seniority. Huiran sighed. Seeing Su Yurong's calm expression, her heart like dead water, she asked, "Then how does the temple master intend to punish us?" "I said that I can respect you, that I can understand you. This being the case, Martial Uncle has not done anything too serious, so why should I punish you?" Su Yurong said, "Martial Uncle has always liked to travel the world. For the future of South Stream Temple, I was forced to interrupt my cultivation and return. Now that I have broken through the wall and come out, there is no need to worry about the temple's affairs. So I ask Martial Uncle to continue traveling. I trust that the scenery beyond the world will not be much worse than the scenery here." Given Huiran's seniority, if she really wanted to punish them according to the laws of the church and the temple, it truly was somewhat inappropriate. But having these granduncles continue to remain in Holy Maiden Peak was naturally even more inappropriate. The so-called traveling was just asking you to leave so that you wouldn't get sick of each other. Su Yorong's way of handling this matter could truly be said to be light-hearted and broad-minded. She was confident that Huairan would be able to accept it. Yichun and Ping Xian looked at Huairan with joy in their eyes. Just when Huairan was prepared to say something, Su Yorong suddenly remembered something. But I do not wish for martial uncle to return every once in a while. That would truly be very troublesome. So let's make it a period of 10 years. Yichun and Ping Xian's expressions flickered at these words. Thinking, will Master accept? Inviting you to travel the world can be understood as a courtesy given to a junior disciple, but only allowing you to return once every 10 years was a clear banishment. But Huairan was well aware that the Holy Maiden's 10-year period referred to the Star Osmanthus festival that South Stream Temple held every 10 years. When she thought about how Su Yorong had not deprived her of the right to participate in the Star Osmanthus festival, what else could she say? She sighed and walked out of the thatched cottage. Huaishu bowed to Su Yorong and Chen Changsheng, then turned and followed. Huaibai was already a Huairen's side. Her expression seemed composed, but her eyelashes trembled, her eyes filled with unease and relief. But in the next moment, the unease and relief in her eyes completely vanished, replaced by shock and fear. Su Yorong's voice once more resounded through South Stream Temple. Yuan Yuaqin, do you think that you can also leave? All the South Stream Temple disciples raised their heads. Some looked at each other while others looked around, thinking, who is Yuan Yuaqin? I've never heard of a disciple with this name in the temple before. Those disciples with faster reactions had already guessed at what was going on. Huairan stopped and turned around to look at Su Yorong without saying a word. Huaishu appeared somewhat perplexed, as if she did not understand what had happened. Huaibai's complexion turned extremely unsightly. More and more disciples understood that Yuan Yuaqin was Martial Grand Aunt Huaibai's secular name. Huairan was somewhat uneasy. Su Yorong did not call her Martial Aunt, nor did she use her Taoist name. Instead, she directly called out third junior sister's secular name. The meaning hidden within was obvious. Huaibai's embarrassment turned to anger. She shouted at Su Yorong, Holy Maiden, what are you doing? Huaishu still had not reacted. She said to Su Yorong, she is still your martial aunt. So how can you do this? Su Yorong knew that this was her martial aunt's personality, so she ignored her. She only looked at Huaibai and said, Yuan Yuaqin, you colluded with outsiders to attack a disciple of the temple. Do you really think that after doing such a thing, I will allow you to leave South Stream Temple? Huaishu finally came to her senses. She glanced at Huairan, wanting to say something, but not knowing what to say. To those South Stream Temple disciples on the plateau, Su Yorong's words made them recall those scenes from back then. At the time, they had formed a sword array, their wills united as an impregnable fortress, resisting the divine domain expert Wu Qiongbai. The situation had been extremely dangerous. At this moment, their martial Aunt Huaibai had suddenly attacked and wounded them, causing the array to fall. How could they forget this scene? Chapter 9:15. With the blue-clothed visitor's sudden attack, the Great Western Continent scheme was exposed, and Wang Pe and Bi Yanghong's thunderous strike together made Huaibai's actions less conspicuous. But many people did not forget, like the disciples of South Stream Temple, like Su Yorong. She calmly asked Huaibai, just what did Shang Xingzhou do to you that you would do such a thing? Huaibai knew that she was in a most troublesome situation. Clenching her teeth, she said, I don't understand what you mean. Su Yorong no longer questioned her. She turned to Chen Changsheng and asked, May I ask His Holiness the Pope to interpret the law? On the plateau, when Chen Changsheng had stopped South Stream Temple from closing, he had relied on the Pope's right to interpret the law. Su Yorong had invited him to speak, partly to borrow his power, but also to prove to the disciples of South Stream Temple that he had the right to do so. Even the Holy Maiden was still a woman, with many careful thoughts that were difficult to describe. Regardless of Huairen's reasons for closing South Stream Temple, Huaibai's actions on the plateau were unacceptable. In any sect, her actions would be unacceptable, and the laws of the church naturally had a clear explanation for this. Or cripple her cultivation and expel her from a sect. Chen Changsheng thought of the scriptures of the Taoist canon he had memorized when he was a child and said, or be punished with house arrest and reflection. Huai Bai's complexion instantly paled. She looked at Huai Run, hesitating to speak. Huai Run wanted to plead for mercy on her behalf, but she suddenly recalled how she, Huai Shu, and Huai Bai had wandered the world for many years and had suddenly been sought out by the Taoists of the Monastery of Eternal Spring, resulting in this trip to the capital to meet with the venerable Taoist Shang Xingzhou. She couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive, her mind a little dazed. Su Yurong looked at Huai Bai and asked, Yuan Yuaqin, which one do you choose? Huai Bai saw Huai Ren's silence and believed that her senior sister had given up on her. Hatred rose from her heart, and she clenched her teeth. House arrest. How many years are you planning to imprison me for? Su Yurong replied, If there comes a day when you can understand your mistakes, you will be released. Huai Bai sneered, her voice shrill as she yelled, You want to imprison me in Holy Maiden Peak for the rest of my life? How can I do as you wish? Su Yurong's expression did not change. She calmly said, It seems that you want to choose the former. The former was to have one's cultivation crippled and be expelled from the sect. This was precisely the punishment that Mu Jiushi had endured in the Li Palace. However, even if that princess of the great Western continent had her orthodoxy's cultivation crippled, she still had her own sect cultivation to protect her, while Huai Bai cultivated the Taoist techniques of South Stream Temple. If all of them were crippled, what difference was there between her and a cripple? Huai Bai's face became even paler, and her eyes became extremely resentful as she said, What if I don't choose? Su Yurong calmly said, Then I will have to directly carry out the rules of the church on behalf of the ancestors. Hearing this, Huai Shu's expression changed slightly. She took a step forward and stood between Su Yurong and Huai Bai. This fiery Taoist nun didn't want to clash swords with the current saintess, but she subconsciously didn't want to see what might happen next. The reactions of the South Stream Temple disciples were different. With a clear cry of swords and the rise of sword intents, several hundred disciples seemed to be scattered about, but they had already formed an extremely complex sword array. The sword energy was majestic and awe-inspiring, blocking off all paths down the mountain. Huai Ren sighed at this sight. She looked at Huai Bai and advised, If your conscience is clear, then reflect on yourself for a few days. I will wait for you at the base of the mountain. Senior sister, how could you be so stupid? Huai Bai's expression was one of extreme pain. It's very obvious that the saintess wants to use me to establish her might. What need is there for evidence and reflection? Huai Ren saw that she was sincere and couldn't help but be somewhat swayed. She took a step forward, wanting to say something to Su Yurong. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the thatched cottage. Sword intents crisscrossed, yet they were restrained. An extremely fierce and cold qi enveloped the area. It was a sword, a very thin, long, and straight sword. The body of the sword was pitch black, its surface glossy and smooth, like black jade. This black jade sword was grasped in Huai Bai's hand. The sharp and frigid blade of the sword was placed across Huai Ren's neck, only a hair's breadth from her throat. Huai Bai had taken advantage of the moment Huai Ren took a step forward to launch a sneak attack and subdue her. Huai Ren's face was somewhat pale. It was hard to say if it was because she had suffered internal injuries from the invasion of the sword intent, or because her junior sister's sneak attack had hurt her mood. A burst of arrogant laughter resounded through the thatched cottage. Huai Bai looked at Su Yurong and Chun Changsheng, her face brimming with pride. However, her smile gradually faded and her voice turned frigid. Correct, you're right. All of this was my plan. The venerable Taoist promised me that as long as South Stream Temple closed for 10 years, I would be the saintess. Chen Changxing asked, And if Yurong broke through the wall and came out of seclusion? Huai Bai sneered, Do you think that if I did all this, she would still have a chance of coming out of seclusion? If she could not break through the wall on her own, then what awaited Su Yurong was naturally death. I truly did not expect that you would abandon the great Tao for a man and break through the wall and come out of seclusion. Huai Bai continued, As for everything else, it's actually very simple. It's not difficult to use the longevity of South Stream Temple to convince this stone-like senior sister, and it's even easier to swindle this violent-tempered, but simple-minded senior sister. Only now did Huai Shu understand what was going on. She was furious, her body trembling, but she did not dare to do anything. The frigid black sword was placed right in front of Huai Ren's throat. Huai Ren's face paled even more, her eyes dimmer, and there was a faint hint of sorrow in their depths. "Papa, Papa!" Huai Bai's fingers descended like the wind, sealing off several of Huai Ren's meridians and sealing off her most important ethereal palace. A cry of alarm rose from the thatched cottage. "Divine finger of the world stream." "Correct. I used the divine finger of the world stream. Senior sister no longer has any chance of counterattacking." Huai Bai harshly retorted, "You juniors actually dare to disrespect me. If possible, I will definitely have you taste what it is like to be pierced by 10,000 ants." As she spoke, Huai Ren's face turned from pale to green, clearly in extreme pain. It was obvious that she was suffering from the pain of the divine finger of the world stream. Ping Xian, Yi Chun, and the other disciples of South Stream Temple were infuriated by this sight, but they feared the black sword and did not dare to step forward. "Of course, I do not hope that this will force you to abdicate," Huai Bai coldly said to Su Yorong. "You are the most ungrateful and callous person of Zhou, aren't you? Just let me leave." Su Yorong ignored her. Looking at Huai Ren, who was being held hostage, she said, "My lady, your intentions might be good, but this world has always been bad." Huai Bai did not understand what she meant. Her expression turned even harsher as she yelled, "Quickly remove the sword array." Su Yorong continued to ignore her, only calmly gazing at Huai Ren. Huai Ren's expression grew increasingly gloomy. The pain of the divine finger of the world stream was truly nothing compared to the pain of being betrayed by the junior sister she had loved for centuries. Chapter 9:16. Huai Shu angrily said to Huai Bai, "Hurry up and release senior sister." Su Yorong's gaze suddenly moved up to Huai Bai's face. Huai Bai seemed to sense two rays of light that seemed to have real heat. Her eyes were blinded by a blinding light. Boom! A gale howled through the thatched cottage. The white grass danced in the wind as wings of fire Tinsum Zhonglong occupied everyone's vision. Su Yorong had revealed her true phoenix body. Boundless light flooded the surroundings as the temperature rapidly rose. The entire thatched cottage seemed to be on the verge of igniting. Huai Bai felt an unimaginable pressure. Shocked and furious, she retreated, but she did not let Huai Ren go. Suddenly, Huai Ren's face turned incomparably pale, and she spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Huai Bai froze and lowered her head, weariness rising in her heart. But it was too late. Huai Ren's seemingly thin and small body exploded with a vigorous and pure energy that seemed to have been cleansed by the South Stream for several hundred years. The frigid black sword was sent flying. Huai Bai felt like a mountain had smashed in her chest, and she howled as she swiftly retreated. Huai Ren turned around, her body like smoke and the fragrance of flowers as she attacked. Her two hands seemed to descend lightly, but they contained the principles of the world, making it impossible to dodge. Tinsome soft sounds came from the flowering trees of South Stream Temple. It was the sound of her fingers striking Huai Bai. With a muffled thud, the winds howled and then gradually receded. A hole about 3 feet deep appeared in the flowering trees of South Stream Temple. Huai Bai stood at the bottom of the hole, her body covered in blood and her face pale. How could this be? She somewhat crazily muttered. Huai Ren calmly stood in front of her and said, "Know the masculine, guard the feminine, and become the stream of the world." "Junior sister, you've never practiced this finger technique correctly." Huai Bai shrieked and turned to leave. With a whoosh of wind, a figure descended like a thunderbolt and slammed into her body. Huai Bai cried out in pain as she fell into the depths of the flowering trees. This figure was none other than the fiery Huai Shu. There was not only fragrance in the depths of the flowering trees, there was also sword intent. Tinsome sword intents abruptly rose up. Huai Bai screamed again and again as her body suddenly staggered. Finally, she could no longer endure and was forced back by those sword glows. Fallen flowers form a grave. She fell into the pit. Her left arm had been severed, and her entire body was covered in sword wounds. She was drenched in blood, and she looked extremely miserable. She looked at Huai Run and climbed up with difficulty. She cried, "Senior Marshal's sister, please spare me." Huai Run looked at her quietly and didn't say anything. The cries of pain gradually became softer, signifying despair. Huai Run was silent for a long time. She turned around and looked at the cottage. She bowed to Su Yurong and Chun Chong Sheng, then walked out. Huai Shu glanced at the bottom of the pit, then left as well. The South Stream Temple disciples walked into the pit, dragged Huai Bai out, and walked to the rear of the plateau. Huai Bai thought about the tragic fate that awaited her. Being imprisoned for the rest of her life was truly a fate worse than death. Endless hatred grew in her heart as she screamed hoarsely, "Primogenitor of Tao will come and save me. At that time, none of you little bastards will have a good ending. When the time comes, I will make you kneel down and beg me." The South Stream Temple disciples glanced at each other, not knowing what to do. After all, this was their martial granddaughter. No matter how angry they were, they couldn't do anything. Huai Bai was still cursing incessantly. Her words were getting more and more unpleasant, and her filthy words were incessant and extremely sinister. Tang 36 and Zhuxiu stood in a pavilion outside the cottage. He couldn't help but shake his head at this sight. At this moment, Su Yurong glanced at Chun Chong Sheng. Chun Chong Sheng froze and glanced at Tang 36. Tang 36 sighed, "Truly a fine pair." Then he glanced at Zhuxiu. A cold wind suddenly stirred, causing the fallen leaves on the pavilion to dance. Zhuxiu arrived between the trees. With a swish, the demon commander's banner sword flew through the air, a gloomy sword glow. Huai Bai's hateful curses came to a screeching halt. She clutched her bleeding throat, her eyes filled with disbelief as she slowly fell to the ground. Dusk fell between the mountains much earlier than it did on the plains. It was still early, but the sun was already approaching the upper edge of the mountain range. The light was somewhat dim, and the trees seemed to be on the verge of burning. On a mountain path in front of South Stream Temple, Ping Xian and Yi Chun led 100-some direct disciples to send off their two martial grandaunts, Huai Run and Huai Shu. Although they were rather far away, one could faintly hear weeping, and the mood was somber and sorrowful. "I didn't think that this martial aunt of yours would have such a powerful cultivation." Chun Chong Sheng stood on the edge of the cliff and looked at the scene. Earlier in the cottage, Huai Bai had launched a sneak attack and used the World Stream Divine Finger to seal Huai Ren's meridians and ethereal palace. No one had expected Huai Ren's personality to be countless times more violent than she usually displayed, and her cultivation was even more unfathomable. She had forcefully mobilized her true essence and spiritual sense to break through the seal and easily subdue Huai Bai, using only one move to render her powerless. The World Stream Divine Finger she used was countless times more profound than Huai Bai's finger technique. It was indescribably profound, otherworldly, and even faintly divine. If she had not been willing to listen to Su Yorong's order to leave and had relied on her cultivation to forcefully resist, it was truly impossible to say what would have happened today. My South Stream Temple has existed for countless years. Although it has always been low-key, its resources are extremely deep. Martial Aunt Huai Run has devoted her entire life to cultivating the Tao and has the potential to reach the divine. She's naturally formidable. Su Yurong added, "But I don't know how she was convinced by your master." Chun Chong Sheng watched from the side. He saw that her beautiful face was incomparably calm, yet it possessed a certain majesty. Perhaps it was because she had her hands held behind her as she stood on the edge of the cliff. At this point, he could already confirm that the omen he had sensed at the summit of Holy Maiden Peak yesterday had come from him. To put another way, he was Su Yurong's greatest problem. If he had not come to Holy Maiden Peak, Su Yurong might not have been forced to break out of seclusion early. Thinking of this, he said, "My apologies. In the future, I will do things more cool-headed." Su Yurong turned and smiled at him. "If even my matter cannot break your cool-headedness, then you should be the one apologizing, right? Chen Changsheng thought this over, then said, "That's reasonable. Then I won't change it." He and she had not seen each other for many years. Their correspondence had also been broken for 2 years. Logically, they should feel a little strange. But in reality, they had gone through life and death together too many times. Blood and water mixed together. You are me, I am you. Just like in the eyes of the world, they were truly a match made in heaven. Now that they were together, they were still as calm and indifferent as they used to be. Su Yurong closed her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. The wind outside the cliff lightly brushed against her face, causing her eyelashes to tremble. Along with her was twilight light. Looking at her face, Chen Changsheng was slightly moved. He slowly lowered his head. Su Yurong's eyes were still closed, but her expression had a slight change. He didn't know if she had sensed something. Chapter 9:17. There was a squelch. It was not a laugh. A mouthful of blood sprayed from Su Yurong's lips. All of it landed on Chen Changsheng's body. Chen Changsheng seemed to be in a very sorry state. Su Yurong opened her eyes and saw this scene. After a moment's thought, she guessed what had happened. She raised her sleeve and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth, revealing a mischievous smile. Chen Changsheng ignored himself. Looking at her pale face, he asked worriedly, "Are you all right?" Su Yurong knew that he had a slight obsession with cleanliness. Seeing him ignore her, she was slightly moved. She took out a handkerchief and carefully wiped the blood from his face. It's good that the clotted blood has been forced out. She was facing the twilight and closing her eyes to meditate and heal her wounds. But Chen Changsheng misunderstood her. Chen Changsheng felt slightly embarrassed, but he was even more worried, even though she said she was fine. Closing the temple and entering seclusion was an extremely important matter. Because of him, Su Yurong had broken through the wall and left seclusion early. Her cultivation would inevitably be greatly affected. Most importantly, her Tao heart would be covered in an indelible mark, and it was highly likely that she would never find the opportunity to break through. Thinking of this, Chen Changsheng's mood became increasingly heavy. Su Yurong knew what he was thinking and said, "Many cultivators encounter a situation like mine. Their Tao hearts will be shaken by a single setback, and they will never have a chance to reach the divine. But you don't need to worry about me, because I am more confident than anyone else. I'm still very young." The so-called cultivation of the Tao was the cultivation of time. As the youngest cultivator in recorded history to be able to see that threshold, she still had many years to comprehend and savor. Most importantly, she had a clear understanding of this point, ensuring that these years would not be wasted and that her Tao heart would not be affected in any way. Hearing this, Chen Changsheng's mood improved a little. The blood on his face had already been wiped clean by Su Yurong. The occasional remnant was transformed into phoenix flames by the twilight and disappeared, but his clothes could not be dealt with. He very naturally took out a clean Taoist robe from the vault sheath and turned around to change into it. His entire movement seemed especially practiced, as if he had repeated it countless times. Su Yurong asked, "You always have a habit of carrying clean clothes? How did he change it so skillfully?" Chen Changsheng thought back to the large hole that had been punched through the wall of the Orthodox Academy all those years ago, that little girl who had held onto the edge of the large wooden barrel and stared at him, that little girl whose face was clearly red, yet still pretended not to care. He suddenly felt a great longing for her, but how could he bring it up? He only spoke of the scene from the bottom of New North Bridge that led to the frigid pool of the Cold Palace. Su Yurong had known the story of New North Bridge since she was a child, so she wasn't surprised. She asked, "Just what's going on with the little black dragon?" He was asking about Bi Tianxin's death, although everyone now knew that this was a scheme of the Great Western Continent. The problem was that before this scheme was exposed, Chen Changsheng had never agreed to have the little black dragon come out for a confrontation. As intelligent as she was, she had naturally guessed that something had happened to the little black dragon. Chen Changsheng said, "I can't be sure, but she shouldn't be in danger." Su Yurong asked, "What do we need to do?" Chen Changsheng shook his head and said, "Let's wait for a while." Su Yurong didn't say anything more and asked, "Have you ever walked around here?" Chun Chongqing replied, I've seen a few of the sites you mentioned in your letters, but I didn't have the time to look at them in detail. Su Yurong smiled. How about I take you to see them? Chun Chongqing replied, Okay. The mountain breeze stirred, the flowering trees swayed, and a fragrance assailed their senses. The white crane broke through the twilight and landed in front of them. With a clear cry, the white crane soared into the sky with the pair on its back. With incredible speed, it once more tore through the twilight, pierced through the clouds, and arrived at the summit. Standing at the edge of the cliff, Chun Chongsheng sighed as he gazed at the plains, the Tong River, and those mountains that had already turned the color of ink. When you were little, you said in your letters that the scenery here was superb. It really was true. Su Yurong forced herself to calm down. Did I write you letters when I was little? Perhaps you're mistaken, but I wrote you quite a few letters a few years ago. Chun Chongqing smiled. The white crane should still remember them. So how could you forget? At these words, the white crane softly cried out, indicating that this was indeed the case. A slightly annoyed expression appeared on Su Yurong's face. I don't know how you managed to trick it into trusting you, but it doesn't even listen to my words. Chun Chongsheng took her hand and sat down on the most prominent rock on the edge of the cliff. Ever since I was little, I've liked to meditate and cultivate on this rock. Yes, you said so in a letter when I was 9. Hey, you really did remember wrong. I didn't remember wrong, because the scenery you described in the letter was exactly the same as this place. I don't want to talk to you. Fine, then 3 years ago, you said in your letter that there were many birds here, so why don't I see them? Do you want to see? I can have many birds come and play. This is the so-called myriad birds paying homage to the phoenix. Yes, forget it. Night is approaching, and everyone needs to rest. There's no need to disturb them. That's fine, but what about that pheasant? Chun Chongsheng was naturally speaking of the golden-winged great pung in the garden of Zhou that was still far from maturing. It likes to eat meat, so I sent it to the plains. Plains? It's the grassland that you gave me. Yeah, let's find a chance to go and see it together. What are we going to see? If the monsters in the garden of Zhou like it, they can live there. We can also live there. Yesterday, he had rushed all the way from Fengyang City to here, his heart full of worries. Then he had encountered the closing of South Stream Temple and Tianxin's death. After several soul-stirring battles, Chun Chongsheng was already exhausted to the extreme, and fatigue gradually overtook him. He and Su Yurong sat on the rock by the edge of the cliff, leaning against each other. Just like in the Garden of Zhou, they were extremely relaxed and comfortable. Very quickly, they closed their eyes. After an unknown amount of time, Su Yurong suddenly opened her eyes. She calmly gazed at Chun Chongqing's face as if she wanted to find some other emotion besides exhaustion, but she found nothing. He was still the same as he was in the past, incomparably clean from the inside out, untainted by dust, without any distracting thoughts. Chun Chongqing, why is it that after I turned 10, you were unwilling to reply to my letters? Su Yurong softly asked him. Chun Chongqing was already asleep, so it was impossible for him to answer her question. Suddenly, Su Yurong opened her eyes wide and looked at Chun Chongqing, a curious expression on her face. Then, she seemed to think of something and became rather nervous. She looked around her. The chirping of birds on the cliff suddenly stopped. The strange beasts all lowered their heads, and even the white crane turned its head to look at the distant mountains. Su Yurong lowered her head and kissed him. Yes, just like the taste of glutinous rice cake. It wasn't bad. At this moment, Chun Chongqing opened his eyes. But they did not separate. You didn't guess it, did you? How could I be so easily seen through by you? It's still that phrase I've repeated for so many years. My romance novels are the best. Chapter 9:18. They looked into each other's eyes at the closest possible distance, seeing themselves reflected in each other's eyes. All was quiet, no sound at all. After an unknown amount of time, the two of them parted. I'm a little hungry, Su Yurong seriously said to him. Chun Chongqing's voice trembled as he asked, What do you want to eat? The white crane once more soared into the sky, breaking through the clouds and leaving the mountains to arrive at a small village not far from the Tong River. Su Yurong brought him to the front of a very unremarkable house. and then a middle-aged woman welcomed them in with great surprise. Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong both wanted to eat the beef ribs from Fortune Peace Road. The middle-aged woman said, "I don't know how to cook the food of the Northerners, but I just happened to have a few three-flower fish today. Why don't I make a pot of fish with tofu?" Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong glanced at each other. They hadn't expected that what they had regretfully missed out on back then would be made up for here. The tender fish mixed with the even more tender tofu gave off an indescribably delicious taste, and the addition of the bright red chili oil made it even more exquisite. Just like in Fortune Peace Road, Chen Changsheng and Su Yorong first quietly ate for a very long time. Only when their appetites were somewhat satisfied did they begin to chat. All sorts of side dishes were placed around the fish pot, creating a very beautiful sight. The glutinous rice cake that Su Yorong had specially ordered seemed rather out of place. "It seems like you really do like to eat sweet things." Chen Changsheng recalled the candied dates she had brought with her on the shore of the Heaven Lake in Mount Han. Su Yorong did not answer him. Her small face was slightly red, though it was hard to say whether it was because of the spiciness or because of the spiciness. They began to comb through all the recent events. The imperial court's thoughts were already crystal clear, and Chen Changsheng had long since mentally prepared himself. But Priest Xian's death had still left him somewhat sorrowful. When the Orthodox Academy was reborn from its ruins, Priest Xian could be said to have been the earliest witness. No one could have expected him to have this sort of identity. Moreover, the Great Western Continent scheme had been exposed, but everyone knew that this matter was still not over. Bianghong and Wuqiongbai had gone to White Emperor City, and no one knew what the outcome would be. The White Emperor was probably heavily injured in his battle with the Demon Lord and has been in seclusion for the last few years to recover. White Emperor City is basically in Madame Mu's hands. She made no attempt to conceal her worry, because she already knew why the Black Dragon had gone to White Emperor City. The Black Frost Dragon clan contributed greatly to the founding of the Yao race. Gigi should be safe there. Chen Changsheng replied, "I'm just a little worried about Senior Bianghong." Su Yorong thought of Bianghong and Wuqiong-bai's desolate backs as they rode away on the clouds that day, and also fell silent. The world was still not at peace. If even these two experts of the divine domain were to encounter sorrowful matters, who could remain uninvolved? Moreover, Chen Changsheng was the Pope while she was the Holy Maiden. Both of them had their own responsibilities, so it seemed impossible for them to return to the plains. Chen Changsheng said, "Speaking of which, the person I should thank the most today is Qiu Shanjun." Su Yorong said, "Senior Marshal Brother is indeed an extraordinary person." As she said this, her expression was very calm, her tone very natural, suffused with a hint of closeness and trust. If it was an ordinary young man, hearing such words, it was inevitable that he would be a little unhappy. Chen Changsheng was no ordinary young man, but he still felt somewhat uncomfortable. But he could not say anything, because what Qiu Shanjun had done today was worthy of his gratitude. Moreover, he had personally seen and felt in Sloping Cliff Horse Farm that Qiu Shanjun truly was an extraordinary person. Su Yorong was rather shocked and speechless by Chen Changsheng's recount of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm's past. She thought to herself, "You and Senior Marshal Brother's eyes are truly. When I was drinking with him by the stream, he once mentioned that he liked a girl." Chen Changsheng glanced at Su Yorong and casually said these words. Su Yorong very calmly replied, "You've always had many girls at your side." This was true. From Luo Luo, who had climbed over the wall of the 100 Herb Garden to the Orthodox Academy and refused to leave, to the little Black Dragon, who had used her true blood to save his life under New North Bridge and then protected him, to Mo Yu, who would sneak into the Orthodox Academy every night to lust after the fragrance on his pillow, and even now, the demon Princess Nank was still holding onto the corner of his clothes. Chen Changsheng did not know how to explain, so he could only lower his head and eat, preparing to pick up a piece of glutinous rice cake to taste. Su Yorong did not let him taste it. Confused, he asked why. Su Yorong was somewhat bashful and did not know how to explain, so she could only pluck the glutinous rice cake from the plate and put on her own plate. Chen Changsheng thought that she was truly angry. He thought that it was hard to explain to those girls, but there was one thing that could probably be explained. When I was 10, I learned that I had always been ill, incurable, and that I would not live past 20, so I did not reply to your letter. Su Yorong realized that he had not been asleep and had heard everything she had said. Her bashfulness deepened, and she lowered her head in silence. Chen Chongqing looked at her and very seriously said, "Don't be angry at me for this matter." He and Su Yorong were the same age, and their birthdays were only 3 days apart. When they were 6.5 years old, they had an engagement with each other. What kind of person was Su Yorong? When she was 5, the blood of the heavenly phoenix was awakened, and she was carefully raised by the divine empress and the saintess. Although she was only 6.5 years old at that time, let alone her grandfather, the Grand Chancellor, even if the divine empress wanted her to marry, she still had to listen to her opinion. From the day she knew that she had an engagement, she was very curious about the other side of the engagement. She sent a white crane to Xining with a letter. After Chen Chongsheng received her letter, he began to reply. This correspondence continued until he was 10 years old. They were never strangers. But after the letters were cut off, Su Yorong disliked the little Taoist priest and did not want to remember these things. Now, these childhood memories, such as the bamboo dragonfly, seemed to be slowly remembered. When you asked me who I was in the first letter, was your tone really terrible? How was it terrible? I was really curious. In the last letter, you scolded me really fiercely. Who told you not to reply? Because I didn't want to implicate you, and you didn't like me at the time. In truth, I did like you. What did you say? I said that from that time until now. I've always liked you. Me too. What do you plan on going next? Mountly. Upon hearing this, Su Yorong's expression froze. She curiously asked, "You're going to find senior brother?" Chen Chongsheng thought it over, then said, "I'm going to find senior brother." This was a witty remark. If one was not as intelligent as Su Yorong, they would find it very difficult to understand in such a short time. She seriously asked, "Then what about White Emperor City?" Chen Chongsheng thought of Zhixio's current situation and said, "There are priorities. I'll first take care of this matter before anything else." The next chapter will not talk about love. Chapter 919. The closing ceremony of South Stream Temple came to an abrupt end, but the events that had occurred during this time had shocked the entire world. The battle between experts of the divine domain, the exposure of the Great Western Continent scheme, and the death of the blue-clothed visitor had recently become the topic of discussion. Holy Maiden Su Yorong had broken out of seclusion, and the fact that she and Pope Chen Chongsheng were actually able to directly contend against an expert of the divine domain had incited countless discussions and reverence. The Tang, Qiushan, Mutuo, and Wu clans had become extremely low-key in their conduct, and Tang 36 had naturally played a role in this. The Longevity sect had sent the latest news, formally apologizing to the Tang clan and dispatching an elder to cure the Tang clan's eldest son. But Chusu had vanished. Anyone could see that the withering Longevity sect could no longer control this monster. The Great Zhou imperial court was still powerful, and Shangxingzhou still firmly sat on the highest seat in the world. According to the agreement from back then, Pope Qin Changsheng still could not return to the capital. He could only travel the world, and no one knew when this situation would be resolved. But anyone could see that the general trend of the world was like the starry sky after a rain, faintly undergoing some sort of transformation. After finishing the pot of fish with tofu, Chen Changsheng did not linger. On the morning of the next day, he brought Tang 36 and the others out of Holy Maiden Peak. As for what he and Holy Maiden Su Yorong had said and done in South Stream Temple that night, no one naturally knew. The upper reaches of the Tong River were dotted with peaks, either in the sunlight or in the clouds, each with its own beauty. Spirit Camphor Peak, where Gentle Stream Monastery was located, had many fragrant camphor trees, filling one's eyes with their verdant beauty. After walking through Spirit Camphor Peak for 10 some li, one arrived at the edge of cliff. Clouds curled around the cliff, making it difficult to see the bottom. On the other side, one could faintly make out a lone peak, the two sides connected by a chain that swayed in the mountain breeze. Just looking at it made one's heart palpitate, much less walking on it. What's the name of that mountain? Tang 36 pointed across from him. Yi Xiaolian, who had brought them here, said, "This peak is called Solitary Peak. It is the easternmost of Mount Li's 36 peaks. In the past, senior brother Qiushan would often practice the sword on this peak. Sometimes the clouds would scatter and the sky would shine brightly. Standing here, one could see everything clearly." Tang 36 heard the emotion in her voice and teased, "You saw him here when you were little and fell in love with Qiushan Jun at first sight? On the divine avenue of the Li Palace. He and Yi Xiaolian had once had an extremely famous quarrel, so he naturally knew of her feelings." Yi Xiaolian was no longer the little girl of the past. Hearing these words, she did not get angry. She calmly replied, "So what if it is?" Tang 36 moved closer to her and asked in a low voice, "Pardon me for asking, but who do you like now?" Yi Xiaolian imperceptibly glanced at the distant Chen Changsheng, smiled and said, "I like the house master the most." Hearing this answer, Tang 36 felt bored and said, "Women are really fickle." Zhishio listened to this conversation from the side and felt that it was rather boring. He walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the swaying chains in the clouds. He felt that this was more interesting. The lone peak was faintly discernible in the clouds. Chen Changsheng looked in that direction, but he was thinking about something else. Hu 36 knew what he was worried about and whispered, "There's still no news from White Emperor City." Chen Changsheng asked, "Even if we can't find Jiji, why hasn't Guardian Jean been contacted?" Hu 36 replied, "Because the incident happened too suddenly. There weren't many details reported, but this subordinate remembers reading excerpt from 2 years ago. Guardian Jean was demoted once more and is currently farming outside White Emperor City. Even if we can get in touch with him, he probably won't be able to solve the problem." Chen Changsheng said nothing. After that night in the mountains, while he was recuperating in Sloping Cliff Horse Farm, he had already re-established contact with Jiji. Later on, he went through the Mount Song Army headquarters to Wenshui City, while Jiji went alone to White Emperor City, 80,000 li away. The Orthodoxy wanted to contend with the imperial court for the greater power of the world, while he wanted to scheme and contend with his master Shang Xingzhou. The first thing they needed to consider was their respective external aid. He had gone to the Wenshui Tangs, to Holy Maiden Peak, and his upcoming journey all because of this consideration. Jiji played the most important role in this matter. To the Orthodoxy and the imperial court, what was the most important external aid? It was not the 4 great clans led by the Tang clan, not the sects of the south, not Holy Maiden Peak, but the demi-human race. From a certain perspective, White Emperor City's stance could decide many things. Madame Mu's stance was already extremely clear. He could only hope that Jiji, who had an extremely deep relationship with White Emperor City, could temporarily hold the fort. Logically speaking, even if Madame Mu had participated in the Great Western Continent scheme and stood on his master Shang Xingzhou's side, Jiji should still be safe in White Emperor City. But he felt more and more uneasy, though he didn't know why. Perhaps it was because his spiritual connection with Jiji had been severed. Perhaps it was because the people of the Orthodoxy could not touch Jin Yulu. Or perhaps it was because it had been several years since he had heard any news of that fellow. "Just where have you been these past few years? And what have you been doing?" Tang 36 walked to his side and comforted him. "There's no need to worry. That bear brat skin is thick and he'll be fine. At most, he'll just suffer a little." Zhishio thought of that bear youth in the Orthodox Academy who used his back to smash trees every day to hide his food, and the hard lines on his face softened. Tang 36 asked, "Where do we go next?" Chen Changsheng pointed across from him and said, "Mount Li." That solitary mountain in the clouds was Mount Li. At the northernmost end of the Luome Mountains, next to the most fertile plains of the human world, 36 mountains pointed north like sharp swords. These mountains were all Mount Li. Tang 36's expression chilled as he asked, "Are we really going?" "We don't have the time right now." Chen Changsheng glanced at Zhishio and thought to himself, "We truly don't have the time." Suddenly, a tremor came from the edge of the cliff. This tremor was so intense that the clouds outside the cliff were shaken into threads and slowly dispersed. The chain became much clearer, and it was even possible to see the rust on it. Soon after, there was another tremor, and the dust on the ground was jolted into the air. Where did this tremor come from? Tang 36's expression became serious. Chen Changsheng was somewhat nervous. They were all looking at Zhixio. The tremor came from Zhixio's body. It was like a tide, like a thunderclap. Zhixio's face was abnormally pale, as if he had just suffered a heavy injury. There was clearly something wrong with White Emperor City, but Chen Changsheng still wanted to go to Mount Li Not because he had been seized by a sudden impulse. It was because Zhixio's tide rush of blood was flaring up more and more frequently, and his illness was worsening. There's no need to worry. I should be able to live for another 10 days to half a month. Zhixio made a rare joke, but no one could laugh. Chapter 920. In the distant west of the continent was a beautiful but dangerous world. That world had countless mountains, and snow could be seen in all 4 seasons. It also had countless surging rivers and innumerable primitive forests. Whether underwater or in the forests, countless vicious beasts lived. This was what the common people called the land of the demi-humans. In the depths of the land of the demi-humans was an extremely grand and wondrous city. It towered between the mountains and was surrounded by 800 li of the Red River. Its walls were built from white, jade-like stone. Coupled with the ever-present clouds and mist from a distance, it was indescribably magnificent, inspiring reverence in those who looked at it. This city did not have the capital's imperial design, nor did it have the array beneath the Li Palace. It relied on its sturdy walls to resist foreign enemies, as well as the even steadier wills and violent temperaments of the demi-humans. This was the legendary White Emperor City. It was said that countless years ago, the heavenly tome monoliths fell on the eastern continent. The human race developed intelligence, and, at the same time, the demi-humans began to awaken and develop their own civilization. It was just that the distance from a mausoleum of books was rather long, so their civilization progressed a little slower than the human race. Some demi-humans that lived in the wilderness all year round still had a wild nature to this day. Because of their straightforward and simple temperaments, the demi-humans did not have an easy time on the continent before they formally established their nation. They suffered the discrimination and oppression of the demon race, and the nearly extinct elf race was a concrete witness to this tragic history. The role the human race played in this part of history was not glorious. It was only 1,000-some years ago that, in order to resist the increasingly tyrannical and powerful demon race, several generations of great leaders of the demi-human race and the human race expended enormous patience and wisdom to finally persuade the two sides to put aside their old grudges and join hands. Ultimately, in the reign of Emperor Taizong, they established an alliance. After the long passage of time, the hatred between the demi-humans and the human race gradually faded, but because of that even more distant history and the irreconcilable differences between the two sides still retain some hostility or wariness. For example, in the most recent war, the armies of the human race and the demon race had fought on the snowy plains for 2 whole years. Other than symbolically moving 2 tribes eastward by 1,000 li, the demi-humans had done nothing else. This point had already given rise to much discussion in the capital. The human ministers and generals were worried that the demi-humans might have other ideas, but the venerable Taoist master Shang Xingzhou remained calm. He was extremely confident in the entire situation, because he believed that he clearly understood what Madame Mu wanted. Actually, I don't even know what I want. The identity we live with is actually the role we play, whether it's a princess, a queen, a wife, or a mother. It's just that the longer you act, the more roles you play, the more you forget who you really are. If I don't even know my own role, how can I judge what I want? If we want to get a clear and real answer, then we must look back to the beginning of time and remember what you saw when you opened your eyes to see the world. At the time, I was held in my father's arms by the sea. The waves were like rolling ink, and there was a white dot dancing in the middle. It was very beautiful. What about you? The 800 li of the Red River encircled White Emperor City. The plains on both sides were fertile, the forests lush, and countless tribes lived here. In the depths of a very hidden cliff, there was a small building that seemed to be one with heaven and earth. In front of the small building was a meadow. Below the meadow was a cliff, and in the distance was the surging red waves. From there, one could see the majestic city in the clouds. A woman stood on the edge of the cliff, gazing at the Red River and White Emperor City as she slowly spoke, her tone indifferent. A black-clothed girl stood behind her, a chain tied to her ankle. The other end of the chain extended deep into the ground. It was the little black dragon, Gigi. As she gazed at the woman's back, she very naturally recalled the Tianhai divine empress that she once feared the most. Perhaps it was because the woman's figure also gave off an unreachable feeling, or perhaps it was because the woman also habitually held her hands behind her. In the present world, there was only one woman that could compare to the Tianhai divine empress, White Emperor City's empress, Madame Mu. Upon hearing Madame Mu's question, the little black dragon very seriously pondered it, then replied, "I saw a pearl." She then spread her hands and gestured in the air. A pearl this big. If she was not exaggerating, then this pearl was truly a little ridiculously big. The little black dragon continued, "Mother said that I loved to cry when I was born, and no amount of coaxing could soothe me. Only when I held that pearl in my bosom did I calm down." Madame Mu asked, "Presumably, that was the legendary mermaid's tear?" The dragon race resided in the extremely distant depths of the southern sea, and the great western continent was also a country in the sea. The two shared similar legends, so they could be considered to understand each other. The little black dragon said, "Later on, at New North Bridge, Scholar Wong snatched it away." Madame Mu said, "He only knows how to bully a child like you. Lord Wong is no hero." The little black dragon approved of these words. With an innocent expression, she said, "Empress, you are an extraordinary person, so don't bully a child like me." Madame Mu replied, "I am not a hero, only a woman." Aggrieved, the little black dragon asked, "Then how long is Lady prepared to imprison me?" Madame Mu replied, "I am not Lord Wong, nor am I Tianhai. I have no interest in imprisoning you." After a moment of silence, the little black dragon asked, "Then when are you prepared to kill me?" Back then, the demi-human race was able to establish their country entirely because of your Black Frost Dragon tribe. If I do not want to be spurned by the entire demi-human race, I will not kill you." Madame Mu looked at the massive white city on the other shore of the Red River and calmly said, "Moreover, although your cultivation level is not at its peak, you are still not that easy to kill. If not for the fact that your soul was once extracted, I would have found it very difficult to silently restrain you." Upon hearing these words, the little black dragon recalled those scenes at the bottom of New North Bridge, especially the pain of having her soul extracted by the Tianhai divine empress. Her small face paled, and when she recalled the pain of having her deep freeze dragon breath forcefully extracted by this person, her vertical pupils constricted, a hint of hatred flashing through them. "Just what do you want to do?" she asked as she stared at Madame Mu's back. Madame Mu did not turn around. She softly said, "I should be asking you this question. In the Battle of the Snowy Mountains, His Majesty the Demon Lord naturally did not kill you out of consideration for your father, but you faked your death and sneaked into White Emperor City. What does Chen Chongqing want you to do?" The little black dragon said nothing. She had come to White Emperor City on Chen Chongqing's orders to first see the White Emperor, but the White Emperor was in seclusion recovering from his injuries, so she could only think of a way to see Luo. But before she could enter the palace, she realized that something was wrong. By the time she was prepared to leave, it was already too late. Madame Mu had captured her and brought her here. Chen Chongqing's orders had been very clear. Whether she was seeing the White Emperor or Luo, she had to hide it from Madame Mu. Everyone knew about the problems between the imperial court, the orthodoxy, and White Emperor City, but she had not expected Madame Mu to take such an unyielding stance. Her tacit understanding with Shang Xingzhou alone could not explain this. She suddenly thought of a possibility and said in a low voice, "Could it be that the people of the great western continent want to stir up a storm on the continent?" Madame Mu faintly smiled. "We've been preparing for several centuries. How could a single storm be enough?" With her conjecture finally confirmed, the little black dragon fell quiet for a very long time, then said, "Have you still not understood the true reason why Mu Jiosher was expelled from the Li Palace? The Pope has always been wary of you, and so have many other people. They have not forgotten you." Madame Mu slowly turned around, her smile fading as she asked, "So what?" The little black dragon stared into her eyes and said, "I don't know what your scheme is, but I know that someone died yesterday, but Chun Changsheng is still alive. Millions upon millions of people lived on the continent, and at every moment, many people would die for all sorts of reasons. If it were just the death of an ordinary person, she would naturally not have paid attention to it, much less intentionally bring it up. Experts of the divine domain had some sort of indistinct connection with each other. Her cultivation had fallen greatly, but this connection had not been lost. She could clearly sense that yesterday, an expert of the divine domain had returned to the Sea of Stars. She did not know that this expert of the divine domain was the imperial uncle of the great western continent. But Madame Mu knew, and a smile on her face instantly vanished. Chapter 9:21. Madame Mu's eyes became extremely serene, like a massive whale was slowly swimming at the bottom of the ocean, about to flap its wings and tail and raise furious waves. Suddenly, she closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was no anger in them, only absolute and frightening calm. It was still the deepest ocean. There were no angry waves, but a pressure that mortals found difficult to endure. When I opened my eyes and saw that little white dot in the stormy waves, I thought it was a seagull, that it represented the freedom of my life. After a moment of silence, she continued, "Many years later, even when Imperial Uncle expelled me from the great western continent, I still believed this, so I did not feel disappointed. On the contrary, I believed that I had obtained my wish. But it was also on that day that I realized that the little white that I saw was not a seagull, but a sail. Zhou Dufu rowed a boat alone through the waves and returned in boredom. Only when I learned the truth of this story did I understand that my life had never been free. That white sail represented coming and going, signifying that we must return to our homeland. This was the true meaning of my life." The little black dragon did not understand the meaning of Madame Mu's words. Madame Mu also had no intention of continuing to explain and left the cliff. Countless years ago, her imperial uncle had found an excuse to expel her from the great western continent. She began to travel the continent, meeting many extraordinary figures, ultimately becoming the empress of the demi-human race. Relying on her icy intelligence and methods, she obtained the White Emperor's trust and love, the Tianhai Divine Empress's trust and friendship. But she had not expected that in the battle between the White Emperor and the Demon Lord in the snowy plains to the north of Mount Han, both sides heavily wounded, Shang Xingzhou, who had hidden himself for so many years, suddenly rose. Her judgment of the situation was still accurate. Without hesitation, she stood at Shang Xingzhou's side and obtained his promise. Just as the situation was gradually getting under her control, and the great undertaking she had been planning for so many years was about to succeed, the imperial uncle she had trusted and even revered since childhood had suddenly died. News of what had happened on the plateau of Holy Maiden Peak had already reached her ears. The great western continent's plan had been exposed. Many people had turned their gazes to White Emperor City, to her. Bianghong and Wuqiang had even come. Logically speaking, she should have been very nervous, at least a little uneasy, but she was not. She was just as calm, composed, and confident as ever. The white sail flapped in the wind, extremely striking in the turbid red waters. The big boat broke through the waves and went straight to the other side. She walked up the stone steps and headed towards the palace at the very top. The thousands of demon ray soldiers on both sides of the stone steps saluted. In the streets not far away, countless demon race citizens knelt on the ground, shouting all kinds of greetings and greetings. Arriving in front of the imperial palace, She gently rubbed her abdomen in her sleeves. Then, she turned around and looked down at the majestic white city. A confident smile appeared on her indifferent face. This was her city. Even if Byung Hong and his wife, Chun Chongsheng, the prefects of the orthodoxy, and Wang Pe came together, they would still die. The demon law was very simple and only had 17 pages. It was written very clearly on the first page. White Emperor City belonged to White Emperor. On the second page, there was a beautiful addition. White Emperor City also belongs to every demi-human that lives within it. In fact, for countless years, the sentence on the first page had been thoroughly implemented, while the sentence on the second page had remained on the page. To the demi-humans, the glory of the demi-human race made them proud to live in White Emperor City. But to become the true master of White Emperor City? That could only be imagined, not even daring to think about it, unless they had already drunk a lot of wine and were as drunk as mud. Perhaps it was for this reason, but even more so because of their personalities, the vast majority of demi-humans love to drink, especially strong wine. The outer part of White Emperor City, along the river, was dotted with all sorts of small taverns. These taverns sold cheap but strong wine and terrible but expensive food. They stole large amounts of money from the lower-class people and the tribal youths who came to sell their wares. A place like this was surrounded every day by the stench of animal hides, feet, and vomit, so it naturally smelled extremely unpleasant. If not for the fact that it was so close to the river and that the Bureau of Health would send people to roughly wash it with the water of the Red River, not even the hunters of the jailing tribe would be able to endure it. A very ordinary small tavern by the river was just as noisy as any other small tavern, and its back door was just as cold and cheerless as any other. A mountain of bowls and wine cups was piled there. The only difference was that the figure squatting in front of the basin, washing the dishes, was extremely tall and sturdy, like a real mountain. The mountainous man had his head lowered as he silently washed the dishes, as if the noisy world behind him had nothing to do with him. The back door of the tavern was pushed open with a creak, and two drunken customers staggered out. They didn't seem to see the man washing the dishes, so they untied their pants and began to pee. The man hurriedly moved the basin further away and reminded them at the same time. Only now did the two customers notice the dishwasher. One of them cursed, "Don't you have eyes? Hurry up and get out of my way." His companion, who had drunk a little less, patted him on the shoulder and pointed at the dishwasher as he whispered a few words to him. The scolding customer sobered up a little and then let out an exaggerated laugh. "Oh my, is this the legendary bear cub?" His companion laughed, indicating that he should hurry up and finish his business and go back to drinking. The customer laughed and cursed a few more times before leaving. The man picked up a large water jar and washed the ground along the wall. Shaking his head, he continued to wash the dishes in silence. It was clear that he was very skilled at washing dishes. The mountainous dishes in the basin danced through his seemingly clumsy hands and were quickly cleaned. He carried the washed dishes back to the tavern's kitchen. Just as he was about to wash the stove, he was called back by the boss, who said that business was too good today and that the front was too busy, so he needed him to help serve wine. When he arrived at the front hall of the tavern, the clamor suddenly stopped and countless gazes were cast over. The lights in the tavern were rather dim, but one could clearly see the face. Although this man, who was as tall and sturdy as a mountain, had a full beard, his eyes were clear and bright. He was clearly still very young, and when one recalled the rumors of the bear tribe being forthright and old-fashioned, this person was likely still a youth. The reason the clamor in the tavern suddenly died down was the arm strength displayed by this bear youth. A total of 12 pots of strong wine hung from his left arm like heavy fruits. They did not tremble in the slightest and seemed extremely stable. As expected of the famed young hunter of the bear tribe, this strength is truly great. He's that Xianyuan Pa. Yes, he was Xianyuan Pa. The bear youth washing dishes in the tavern by the river was Xianyuan Pa. 5 years had passed, but his simple and honest self seemed to still be doing the same thing. To the entire continent, the name Xianyuan Pa had long been cleanly forgotten. However, to the customers who frequented this small tavern and the surrounding neighbors, This name was very famous. This was because he had once been to the capital. To the demonic tribes, the human world was incomparably far away. Anyone who had been there had the qualifications to boast about it. The drunkard who had gone to the back street to pee gave a strange laugh and said, "Isn't this just a piece of trash?" As he said this, many gazes fell on Xian Yuan Po's right arm. Xian Yuan Po's left arm was as strong as a massive tree, but his right arm was somewhat withered for some reason, looking like a withered branch. The contrast between the two arms was extremely clear, making this scene all the more miserable. Chapter 922. A few customers who knew of Xian Yuan Po's experiences in the capital whispered a few words to each other. Only then did the crowd realize that Xian Yuan Po's right arm had been injured and seemed to be crippled. "Do you really believe the bragging of a piece of trash like this?" And an expert of the Tianhai clan. "You might as well just say it's Tianhai Xingxue." The drunkard reeked of alcohol as he yelled, spitting at Xian Yuan Po's feet. Xian Yuan Po remained silent, saying nothing, much less retaliating. With some difficulty, he used his right hand to remove the wine jug from his left arm and placed it on the table. Seeing that he was ignoring him, the drunkard became even angrier and began to curse, his words becoming more and more unpleasant. Some of the customers also began to jeer and jeered at Xian Yuan Po. Xian Yuan Po continued to ignore them. After putting down the jug of wine, he turned and prepared to return. The drunkard suddenly stood up and yelled, "Hey, bear cub, stop right there." Xian Yuan Po stopped and looked over. The drunkard hiccuped and asked with a lisp, "You've really been to the capital?" Xian Yuan Po nodded. The drunkard asked, "You were really schoolmates with His Holiness the Pope?" Xian Yuan Po thought it over, then corrected, "At the very beginning, he and I were both students. Later on, he became principal and I became the supervisor." Hearing this, the drunkard roared with laughter. Many of the customers also began to laugh, feeling that these words were far too absurd. The drunkard pointed at his right arm and jeered, "Look at his arm. That's a piece of trash without the slightest bit of strength. He's only fit to wash dishes, and he calls himself the supervisor of the Orthodox Academy? That's the Orthodox Academy. If you had that kind of ability, would you still be here washing dishes?" The capital of the Great Zhou was too far from the world of the demi-humans. The specifics of many things that happened there were very difficult to transmit to the small taverns of White Emperor City, but the customers of any small tavern, no matter how much they drank, all knew of the Orthodox Academy. The princess they adored and worshipped the most was once a student of the Orthodox Academy, and her teacher was the current pope. If Xian Yuan Po really had once stayed in the Orthodox Academy and even served as a supervisor, then how could he possibly be washing dishes in such a filthy little tavern? There was a table in the corner, and a few customers at the table frowned as they listened. They looked at each other and felt very puzzled. These people were low-level executives of the Red River Trading Company, and they had once followed a caravan to the capital. They knew that Xian Yuan Po wasn't lying, but they didn't know how he had fallen to such a state. After His Holiness the Pope left the capital, he never showed himself again. I'm afraid he can't even take care of himself. So how could he have the energy to care about him? What about Her Highness? After all, it's all an old matter from many years ago. How can a noble person possibly remember it for so long? Moreover, I heard that Xian Yuan Po left the capital before the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. Based on the time, he probably left when he saw that the situation was not right, which was equivalent to running away. How could he still have the face to see Her Highness? Seeing that the situation was getting more and more chaotic, the owner of the tavern reprimanded Xian Yuan Po and chased him back to the kitchen. Xian Yuan Po didn't have any reaction. He carried a dirty bowl outside and continued to wash in silence. In these 3 years, he had been ridiculed and called trash many times, but he had never paid any attention to it. It wasn't because he was numb, nor was it because he had a wooden personality, but because he knew that he wasn't trash, and he didn't feel that he was sinking into depravity. Back then, when his right arm had been crippled by Tianhai, he left Star Caesar Academy of his own accord and went to wash dishes at a night market in the capital. Now, he was just returning to his old job. He remembered very clearly that Chun Changsheng had said that there was nothing shameful about working to earn money. It was a very glorious thing. It wasn't because he had left the Orthodox Academy before the coup of the Mausoleum of Books that he didn't have the face to see his old friends, such as Princess Luluo. When he left the Orthodox Academy, he only used 17 days to run from the capital back to White Emperor City. The 80,000 li of dust and dirt directly caused him to become so thin that he didn't even look human. His body that was as tall and sturdy as a mountain turned into a bamboo pole. Of course, he wasn't running away. He knew that Qin Changsheng was about to die, so he wanted to ask for help. What he didn't expect was that even with the seal that Princess Luluo had specially left for him, he still couldn't enter the imperial palace. On the morning of the second day, he went to the hillside outside White Emperor City to find Jin Yulu for help. But he discovered that this demi-human great general's manor was actually surrounded by the guards of the imperial palace, and there were also many spies hidden in the forest. Xin Yuanpa had no way, but fortunately, it didn't take long before he heard the aftermath of what happened in the capital. The Tianhai Divine Empress died. Chun Changsheng didn't die. The Orthodox Academy still existed. Chun Changsheng even became the Pope, and then Qin Changsheng left the capital, never to be heard from again. To Xin Yuanpa, he could return to the capital's Orthodox Academy, or he could return to his own tribe. Either option was a very good choice, but he chose to stay in White Emperor City, because it was very obvious that something had happened here. He still hadn't seen Princess Luluo, and he still hadn't seen Jin Yulu. Just like this, he silently lived in White Emperor City for 3 years, gradually becoming the object of ridicule, gradually forgotten. But he had never forgotten what he had stayed here to do. At midnight, the tavern was finally empty. Xin Yuanpa finished his strenuous work, used cold water to wash his body clean, changed into a clean set of clothes, and walked to the back gate of the imperial palace in the alley of the Shao clan. He greeted the manager of the food store with familiarity and began his other job, delivering food to the imperial palace. The imperial palace was naturally heavily guarded, and the delivery of food could only be delivered to the office outside the city. It was impossible to walk into the palace. Xin Yuanpa didn't have enough money to bribe those guards, and he wasn't clever enough to curry favor with some noble, so he naturally didn't have accurate information about the palace. But he could use stupid methods to achieve his goals, just like he had in the past 2 years. The manager of the food store had a daily list of dishes. Every day, he would earnestly read it over 3 times, and when he returned home, he would write it down. He was well aware of Princess Luluo's favorite dishes. Those dishes were often produced in the distant human world and were extremely eye-catching on the menu. He could remember them so clearly because he was the logistics manager of the Orthodox Academy. From the very beginning, the Orthodox Academy's meals had all been prepared by him. Through these menus, he could confirm whether Princess Luluo was in the palace, whether she was well, and what her mood was like. Yes, this was the reason he had stayed in White Emperor City. As usual, Xin Yuanpa finished reading the menu and the number of dishes to be bestowed. After confirming that Princess Luluo was fine, he creased his brow. In the depths of winter, snow red was the crispest. The small basket of snow red delivered to the palace 2 days ago was Princess Luluo's favorite dish. Whether it was stir-fried or served in soup, logically speaking, it should have been replenished today. Why didn't he see it? Princess Luluo's mood was somewhat bad. What had happened? Just when Xin Yuanpa was prepared to take the risk and ask around, the news quickly spread from the imperial palace, quickly spreading to all of White Emperor City. Presumably, it wouldn't take long for it to spread to the entire continent, because it was obvious that some important figure in the palace had deliberately released this news. Princess Luluo was about to be married. I'm about to write about my Luluo. I'm a little nervous. Just 1 chapter today.